Another historic election and a year our generation will never forget. Millions of voters across the nation have already cast their ballot weeks in advance, and others are wrapping up voting at the polls as we speak.
Yeah, the coronavirus challenged our voting process as Americans follow those safety guidelines. Absentee ballots here in Pennsylvania, they can be counted past tonight after the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a 3-day extension. This is Watch History Happen Election Night 2020.
Live from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in downtown Pittsburgh, this is Watch History Happen 2020 with Taylor Spirito and Marley Pinchak.
Thank you for joining us for Watch History Happen Election Night 2020. I'm Taylor Spirito.
And I'm Marley Pinchak. Tonight we'll be following key races in Pennsylvania, covering topics like voting, COVID-19, and the economy, and interviews to provide some insight and context.
Joining us tonight from Point Park University will be Point Park President Paul Hannigan, Deputy Chief of Police Nicholas Black, Professor of Political Science Nathan Firestone, and international student Vanessa Vivas. UVU's Colton Tobias sits down with Democrat Congressman Mike Doyle, the incumbent representative, of Pennsylvania's District 18, and his challenger, Republican Luke Negron.
And our correspondents spent today out in the field previewing the polls and attending watch parties to make sure you have eyes in the middle of all this action. We're covering topics that have been hot topics within the last few weeks of campaigns, rallies, and debates, including diversity, the economy, and of course, voting.
At the end of every half hour, we're going to visit our friends at WPPJ Radio as they discuss more topics with the third member of Point Park's student media outlets, the Globe newspaper.
We're watching history happen here on election night, and we'll update you on results on the presidential election as they unfold here in Pennsylvania.
And in the event that the next president isn't confirmed tonight, as many states have extended mail-in ballot deadlines for later in the week, UVU and WPPJ will be hosting live update shows throughout the week to catch you up on the latest poll results.
Be sure to catch those right here on our YouTube and above the streets of Pittsburgh at 6 p.m. throughout the week or until a winner is officially called.
Joining us in studio now is Nick Konopka, where he'll be talking about key Senate races and what states could determine the results of this presidential election.
Thanks, Taylor and Marley. There's no doubt this election is imperative across the board, from the obvious vote for the commander-in-chief to the lesser-known Senate races happening throughout the nation. Right here in Pennsylvania, Republican Representative Mike Kelly, who represents Pennsylvania's 16th district from Erie to Butler, is up for re-election, but newcomer Democratic candidate Kristi Gnibus has given him quite a race. It's important to note that when Kelly won his seat in 2011, the 16th district looked different. That's because the Commonwealth has redistricted in December 2011 and then again last year. The 16th district now includes Gnibus' hometown of Erie, called, quote, battleground for both Democrats and Republicans. According to Business Insider, experts have called this race as going, quote, likely Republican with the single-digit lead Kelly holds over Gnibus. On a more national note, and switching to the Senate, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is up for re-election in the state of Kentucky. 538 shows that as of last week, McConnell holds a 10-point lead over his Democratic challenger, Amy McGrath. This comes just 2 days after McConnell and the Senate confirmed Amy Coney Barrett as Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. After the confirmation, McConnell adjourned the Senate until November 9th, nearly a week after election night. Kentucky is commonly a red state, with McConnell having served in the Senate since 1985. He's likely to win re-election, but we cannot call it until the votes are all in and counted. Sticking within the Senate, 2020 has proven to be a year not to be taken lightly, as it seems anything can happen. Some key Senate seats are likely to flip in the election. Democratic Senator of Alabama Doug Jones barely won his seat in 2017 special election. According to 538, last week his Republican opponent, Tommy Tuberville, holds a 14-point lead over the incumbent. Up in Maine, 4-term Republican Senator Susan Collins is looking towards re-election. Her struggle doesn't come from controversies like President Trump tweeting she isn't, quote, worth the work. Her support of Justice Brett Kavanaugh in 2018, her being the lone Republican to vote against confirming Amy Coney Barrett. Amid all of that, the problem for Collins comes from Maine being the first state to partake in ranked choice voting. This system has voters ranked in their preferred candidates as first, second, and third choice. A candidate has to have a majority of votes, or more than 50%, as compared to the traditional most votes in order to win. These seats and many others are up for grabs in this year's election, so be sure to keep an eye out throughout the night to see what happens. With some Senate races, there are some key states to keep an eye out for the election. Swing states can make or break a candidate's campaign, with right here in Pennsylvania being one of the most sought-after battlegrounds. The Commonwealth's 20 electoral votes went to the Republican candidate Donald Trump in 2016, the first time it went red since 1988 with incumbent President George H.W. Bush. In fact, since 1972, Pennsylvania swung against the eventual winner only twice, in 2000 and 2004, when PA went blue but Republican candidate George W. Bush won the presidency. Last week, 538 put Democratic candidate Joe Biden up 6 points in this year's election, but experience shows that polls can fluctuate in any direction at any given time when it comes to the swing states. Both candidates focused their attention on the state of Michigan during the past week and their final push before election night. Michigan went red in 2016 for the first time since 1988, just like Pennsylvania. Former Vice President Biden visited Michigan on Saturday, whereas President Trump, his son Eric, and current Vice President Mike Pence all held separate campaign events in the Great Lakes state. Another swing state to watch for is Ohio. This state, situated between Pennsylvania and Michigan, does not have a consistent pattern of how it's voted, going red in 2016, blue in 2012 and 2008, and back to red in 2004 and 2000, back to blue in 1996 and 1992. You get it. As of last week, Ohio is the only swing state leaning red in this election, although President Trump's lead has been diminishing. According to 538, the incumbent led his opponent in the Buckeye State by just 4 points. Whoever wins Ohio will have an advantage in the election, as a win in Ohio is never a guarantee. Another frequent campaign stop in the final week before the election night was Florida. Like Ohio, this swing state has flip-flopped in how they've swung over the past handful of elections, going red in 2016, blue in 2012 and 2008, red in 2004 and 2000, and so on. Between Wednesday, October 28th and Saturday, October 31st, the Trump campaign held 6 different events in 6 different Florida locations. Former President Barack Obama campaigned in Tampa and Orlando on behalf of his Vice President Joe Biden 2 weeks ago. Florida has been hit hard with visitations left and right, literally. Of course, it's important to note that every swing state is important to watch. These are the states that the candidates will focus on for a reason. We'll bring you the updates on where these critical electoral votes land as the results come in throughout the night.
All right, Nick, thank you so much for that report. Now, Taylor, let's talk about, just kind of the nuts and bolts on these key states that we're really looking out for. So to start it off, let's look at the electoral votes for each.
Right, of course.
So Florida's coming in strong with 29 electoral votes. So whoever wins that's a major state to win, pretty much. Michigan with 16, Ohio with 18, and Pennsylvania with 20. So
yeah, all swing states to look out for. Of course, Florida having the most electoral votes in that handful that we talked about, that Nick talked about. Looking at the polls now, the last that we heard from Florida was that their votes right now are 50% for President Trump, 49.1% for former Vice President Joe Biden. And as Nick said, all of these states went red in 2016, but these states also have such a history of fluctuating in between whichever candidate they go for. But it's no secret that those states are some of the main battlegrounds that these candidates have focused on, and you can see that from rallies and campaign events that have happened. Joe Biden was over at Heinz Field last night with Lady Gaga. It's very imperative for these candidates to get these states under their belt, because it seems evident that if you can get these states under control and under, your leadership, then you can walk away from this election with a victory.
Yeah, exactly. And just some states that I feel like are kind of a gimme, such as California, that typically in the past has been, won democratically. But, Pittsburgh, for example, we saw Joe Biden and Lady Gaga here last night. I think, Joe Biden kind of wanted to take that extra mile and, see if he can pull just, anyone who may have voted Republically in the past to vote Democratically now. Yeah, so like you said, those the candidates are just really trying to make that effort to see what new polls they can get.
Well, the New York Times even just reported a list of 20 counties that they think can make or break either candidate for this election, and 4 were located in Pennsylvania. One of them was Westmoreland County, located just to the east of us. And a lot of people from Pittsburgh or are staying in Pittsburgh right now, especially the college students, are from Westmoreland County. You're from Westmoreland County.
Yes, I'm from Westmoreland County, and I went and voted today, and there were so many people, like college age kids there. So yeah, that was definitely prevalent in Westmoreland County today.
And one more state that we want to point out real quick that has been flip-flopping, which is really weird to say, is Texas. Texas is primarily a red state, and that comes as no surprise. But as of this morning, President Trump has a 1.1 lead over Joe Biden in the Lone Star State, which earlier, I believe it was sometime last week, maybe October 27th, if I'm remembering correctly, they were dead even in Texas, which is absolutely insane to say. I mean, as Nick said, 2020 is a year that should not be messed with, and so many things are happening that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So we'll have to see where the night goes.
Exactly. Well, there are so many races to follow, and of course, we'll be keeping you informed as the night continues.
But we want to hear from you. Use the hashtag PointParkVotes on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as the show goes on. Ask us questions, tell us how you voted this year, let us know what issues are most important to you. We'll read your messages over the air toward the end of our show.
Now we have to go to a really quick break, but when we come back, Nick Konopka will be back again to give you a breakdown of what in-person voting looked like earlier today.
Hey man, what's up?
Pretty good.
I see you're still smoking. You know smoking helps you age faster, right?
Nah, that's only a myth. Do I really look that old?
Hey man, what's up?
Pretty good.
I see you're still smoking. You know smoking helps you age faster, right?
Nah, that's only a myth. Do I really look that old?
You're watching History Happen here on Election Night 2020, but of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night. All right, welcome back. We have some poll result updates that we want to share with you. Trump has declared victory in Indiana and Kentucky.
And Joe Biden has pulled away with a victory in Vermont. It looks like he won 64% of the vote as compared to Donald Trump's 33%. And in breaking news, Mitch McConnell has won his Senate seat back in Kentucky with a vote 61.1% to Amy McGrath's 35%. Not really surprising there with Mitch McConnell. Of course, we keep getting updates as we go, so we will keep you updated with the numbers and the rest of the states that have declared their winner already as we get those results in ourselves.
Yes, of course, Taylor. And voters have lined up outside of PPG Paints Arena downtown today to cast their ballot in person. Nick Konopka was there and joins us now. Nick, what can you tell us?
Due to the pandemic, Allegheny County really pushed mail-in ballots this year, even going so far as to sending applications to everyone in the county. Despite that, people still made their way over to PPG Paints Arena this year to cast their ballot. Even though the country is experiencing a third surge of the coronavirus pandemic, some voters still feel that it is important to vote in person in this historic election.
You know, I received the ballot in the mail kind of late, and I wanted to make sure my vote got counted today, not 2 or 3 days from now, or the system has a way of making things disappear if you don't do it the right way. And I thought it was very important. All my life since I've been able to vote, I've done it in person. So my wife, my son, and myself, we decided to come up and voice our opinion, which is the way it's supposed to be in a democracy.
To help support the voters waiting here in the lines for the polls, the Big Black Grill has partnered with the World Central Kitchen here in Pittsburgh to provide free meals to anyone who's come to decide to vote.
We're going to be here all day, so we're here tonight hoping we'll have dinners for when people get off work, and if the lines are long, we'll be able to provide food if they're just for sustenance and to encourage people to stay.
When we arrived around lunchtime, voters could walk right in without waiting in line, but that was not the case earlier in the morning.
Yeah, the lines, I would say, they reached around the block earlier this morning. I think the longest wait I heard was around an hour and a half. Okay. But people stayed for the most part. I mean, we had a few people leave, but for the most part, people stayed and the mood was good. Although the lines look sparse at the moment, volunteers do say they expect a larger turnout around 5 p.m. tonight once the workday ends. And they do say that the polls will close at 8 p.m. tonight. Reporting from PPG Paints Arena, this has been Nick Konopka with Watch History Happen 2020.
Thanks, Nick. Leading up to tonight's election, Point Park Athletics Department set up tables around campus to get students to register to vote.
Yeah, these tables were run by student athletes from multiple teams, including volleyball, among others. The students that registered contributed to the record-breaking voter registration numbers.
That's right, Marley. According to data from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, 9 million people are registered to vote in the Keystone State out of its 13 million total population. The Pennsylvania Department of State, reports that in 2016, 70% of registered voters actually cast their vote. President Trump beat then Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton in the swing state by less than 1%.
Many college students now weren't able to vote back in 2016 as most college seniors, now were still 17 back then. This means that these voter registration tables around campus saw students turn out who were registering to vote for their first time in this election, or had already just registered. UVU's Colton Tobias sat down with Point Park's athletic director and one student athlete to talk about their efforts.
To the NFL, there has been a lot of dialogue from athletes to encourage their fans to vote in the 2020 election, with names such as LeBron James and Tom Brady leading the charge in motivating people to exercise their right to vote. This is a message that has come to Point Park's campus, with the athletic department putting out voter registration tables earlier in the semester to encourage their fellow students to vote. A mission that Point Park Athletic Director John Ashelou wanted its students to be a part of.
I think it was an opportunity to show our leadership skills from a student-athlete standpoint. As a student-athlete at Point Park University, I've always told all of our student-athletes that they are entrenched into a leadership position as soon as they're a student-athlete here. So I think it was an ability and an opportunity to show leadership skills that our student athletes have to encourage and educate our fellow student body about the importance of voting and to provide them an opportunity right here on campus where they don't have to go anywhere else to do anything else to vote. So I think that if fellow students are leading it, we thought that more students would take part in the voting registration.
According to the Bowdoin Orient, a Tufts University study found the number of college students for voting jumped from 19 to 40% between 2014 and the 2018 midterm elections. So, it is no secret student athletes from all the different sports on campus participated in helping spread the word about how to register to vote. Something that Point Park volleyball player Ashley Castelli enjoyed, knowing she was being a part of the impact.
Like, personally, it made me feel like I was doing my part in the world and trying to make the world a better place.
Okay. Oh, I love that. So, what about everybody else in the athletic department who participated? Like, are you guys happy that the athletic department decided to do this?
Yes, I think it was it was nice of them to do this and to know that they care and not only just about sports. They care about the real world too.
Along with student athletes feeling a part of the solution with assisting folks and making sure they are registered, John feels the athletic department accomplished something that was meant by so many members of the Point Park community.
I think we did accomplish things. I think that, with social distancing and everything like that, it probably wasn't as much of an impact as we would make any other year if the pandemic wasn't going on. But I still think we still did things because I think a lot of other people took notice that probably did take notice before, faculty members, just regular students. I think they saw us out there doing things. And so I think we made an impact in that way. Even just faculty members emailing me and just saying, thanks for doing that. I think those are kind of resounding effects of what we did.
John also hopes the athletic department can continue the registration tables in future elections, along with doing more community service when the pandemic is behind him. Reporting from downtown Pittsburgh for Watch History Happen 2020, I'm Colton Tobias.
Thanks, Colton. Our partners over at WPPJ Radio will be checking in with our broadcast throughout the evening. Joining them are editors of The Globe, Point Park's student-run newspaper, to break down stories related to the election. We're going to send things over to Carlo Andreassi now. Carlo?
Here you go. Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to our live election night coverage streaming on WPPJradio.com and UView Television. I'm Carlo Andreassi. Tonight, we'll provide information and context, guide you through results, and highlight student reporting from our student newspaper, The Globe. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at WPPJ Radio. Voters across the country have already cast their ballots before Election Day. According to the U.S. Elections Project, based at the University of Florida, more than 100 million Americans voted early, with almost 64 million of those being mail-in ballots. Here in Pennsylvania, voters are able to request an absentee ballot without a specified reason because of the coronavirus pandemic. According to Votes PA, applications for mail-in or absentee ballots should have been requested by the 27th of October. In order for an absentee ballot to count, the ballots must be hand-delivered before 8 p.m. tonight or postmarked no later than today, November 3rd. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in a 4-3 decision that mail-in ballots can be received up to 3 days after Election Day. The Republican Party of Pennsylvania challenged the decision all the way to the United States Supreme Court, arguing that the state court decision violated constitutional provisions as, quote, the federal statute setting a uniform date for the federal elections. The Supreme Court denied the request, with Justice Samuel Alito writing in a statement, quote, I reluctantly conclude that there is simply not enough time at this date to decide the question before the election, end quote. Justice Alito also said that the case should be decided after the election takes place, meaning that votes received after Election Day in Pennsylvania may be thrown out. Newly appointed Justice Amy Coney Barrett did not take part in this decision. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends that voters going to the polls wash their hands, wear a mask, and practice social distancing. In a statement released on November 1st, the CDC notes that voters have the right to vote regardless of whether they are sick or in quarantine. These voters should follow health guidelines and notify poll workers that they are sick or in quarantine when they arrive at the polling location. WPPJ's Alexis Bonifate is also here in studio throughout the night following any election results. Alexis, do you have the numbers? What are they looking like right now?
Thank you, Carlo. So we do have a couple states that have closed. Indiana, their polls closed at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. We have CNN, CNBC, and CBS News all declaring that as a victory for President Trump. In Indiana, he will receive 11 electoral votes. Sources The Hill, LA Times, and NBC News have called Vermont for Joe Biden, and he will take free electoral votes there. In Pennsylvania right now, the polls closed only about a little under a half hour ago. Joe Biden does have a lead with 82.8%, but only about 3% of the vote is in right now. 20 electoral votes are up for grabs here in the Keystone State. Specifically locally, we are keeping a close eye on a few U.S. House races. In part of Allegheny County, we have the 17th Congressional District with incumbent Connor Lamb and Republican challenger Sean Parnell. Both men are combat veterans and have run with this at the forefront of their campaigns. In PA District 18, a little bit south of the city, we see Democratic incumbent Mike Doyle and his opponent on the other side of the aisle, Luke Negron. Another local election to keep a close eye on stretches north to Erie County. In PA District 16, with Democratic challenger and school teacher Christy Ganibus trying to unseat 9-year incumbent Republican Mike Kelly. Currently, the Democratic Party holds 232 to a 197 232 seats to a 197 Republican seats majority over the Republicans in the U.S. House. And even though Pennsylvania is not in a Senate election year, 538 is reporting that Democrats have a 3 in 4 chance of flipping the Senate. So, as I said, polls closed in PA 30 minutes ago, but we do have a long night of results, and we got to stay tuned to see what happens here in the Keystone State.
All right. Thanks, Alexis. So joining us now to talk about voting is Jordan Hronik.
Yes.
Jordan is the editor-in-chief of the Point Park Globe student newspaper. Thanks for joining us.
Yep, thank you.
So I have some questions about the article you've written.
Yes.
So you've spoken with students about the voting process. How did they vote in this election?
Most students that I spoke to, they used a variety of different methods for voting. I spoke to a couple students who voted early by mail, a couple students who voted early via absentee ballot because they were here at school but wanted to vote in their home district. But a lot of students that I spoke to, and I wrote this article a couple weeks ago, but a lot of students I spoke to planned to either vote in person today or turn in their ballots by hand rather than mailing it in. And that, honestly, I expected that to have a lot to do with paranoia caused with the mail-in voting system, possibly by the current president. But most of the students I talked to chose those options simply because they didn't trust themselves to be able to mail in the ballots on time in order for them to be counted.
Right, because, people our age, we aren't too familiar with, mailing something in. It's not really our generation. Another question, voters in PA who didn't vote in person had to send their ballot in a secrecy envelope.
Yes.
What happens to the voters' ballots that didn't follow that rule?
If you sent your ballot in naked, as they say, or without the second secrecy envelope that they provided, it could not be counted, and that was due to a Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruling. That's what they ruled.
Interesting. So what are all the ways you have heard that people are voting?
I talked to students who were voting by mail early. They were voting by mail, as in they requested a ballot to be sent to them. They were going to fill it out by hand, and they were going to either drop it off at a voter box or at their county elections office, either before Election Day or on today. Students were voting by absentee ballot, so sending in a ballot back to their home county. Students were going in person to the polls today to vote. And I talked to one student who was actually driving home from here at Point Park to Ohio to vote in person as well.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting. Hey, going the lengths.
Mm-hmm.
So what were some of the attitudes about mail-in ballots from the students you talked to?
Most of the attitudes that I saw did not have to do with questioning whether or not mail-in voting was fraudulent or not fraudulent, but a lot of students were concerned about the state of the U.S. Postal Service due to cuts that were made to the USPS by the current president. Students were unsure of whether or not their ballots would be mailed back in time. That was the main concern I saw. I saw, not that mail-in voting was prone to fraud or anything like that, but that it wouldn't make it back in time to be counted.
Right, and that's a huge reason why I voted in person personally.
Yes.
And so, do you think that mail-in ballots are going to result in a mess with this election, i.e., votes not getting counted or the process being delayed?
It is definitely going to delay this process, especially here in the Keystone State, given that in 2016, Trump only won by a margin of 44,000 votes. I do not see us having any results here in the state tonight. I believe it is going to take at least a week for us to know what Pennsylvania is looking like, just because the race here is so tight.
At least a week.
Yes.
Do you think that this election could be called before we know the results of Pennsylvania?
I think it could in certain circumstances, but I think Pennsylvania really is key to who wins this election.
Yeah, it's the most important state in this election, in fact. 538 says that if Trump loses Pennsylvania, then he has like less than a 1% chance of losing the entire election. If Trump wins Pennsylvania, then his chances are shot up to 60%. So it's high stakes with this state, definitely. So the Globe will have a special edition coming out on Thursday. Can you give us a preview of the stories your team is working on?
Well, we're working on election coverage tonight, of course, as it happens. But we also have stories pertaining to the future of Roe v. Wade. We have stories pertaining to the platform TikTok and how that has been used by young activists. And one of our mascot correspondent, Sarah Gibson, wrote a special column this week about the Washington Nationals' mascots and how they do a race, like how we do here in Pittsburgh with the pierogies, but they do of old presidents. So that's pretty fitting for this week's theme. But that's some of the stuff that we got in this week's issue.
All right. That's great. So Jordan Hronik is the editor-in-chief of the Globe newspaper here at Point Park. Thank you for speaking with us.
Yep, thank you.
Coming up in our next segment, WPPJ's news director Nick Tomarello speaks with Next Pittsburgh Media columnist and director of the Center for Media Innovation, Andy Conti. Now back to Marley and Taylor next door.
WPPJ, thank you for that insight. When we come back, we have a live look at the scene right behind us as Point Park students gather to watch the election results unfold. Stay tuned.
Forty 40% of food in the United States is never eaten. At the same time, 1 in 8 Americans is struggling to put enough food on the table. Before you let your food go bad or throw your leftovers in the garbage, think about your options. To learn more about food waste and how you can reduce food waste at home, visit www.nrdc.org/issues/food waste.
Night 2020. But of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night. One race in Pennsylvania we're keeping a close eye on is the race in the House of Representatives for PA District 18.
UVU's Colton Tobias sat down with both candidates for the seat, and we want to preview those interviews for you now.
That the ACA is in danger of being overruled, and if that is the case, how will you assure folks in the district that they will have affordable health insurance?
Well, it's certainly a concern that we have. Right now, as we speak, that case is before the Supreme Court, and they're going to be hearing that case shortly. And now Judge Barrett will be sitting on that court with a 6-3 majority. That bill, when we passed it, my committee helped write that bill. I'm very proud of it. We brought insurance to 20 million Americans who didn't have insurance. But more importantly, we ended the practice of insurance companies discriminating against sick people. A lot of insurance companies will say, well, we'll cover you for everything except that one thing that makes you sick, a pre-existing condition. We made it possible that insurance companies couldn't factor that in. More importantly, too, the caps in insurance. All these policies used to have annual caps and lifetime caps on how much they would pay. And a good example would be if you had a child with cancer and you had to buy very expensive treatments for the cancer treatments. Once you hit that annual cap, the insurance companies didn't pay anymore. So you'd see these families that had insurance holding like fundraisers, fish fries, to raise money so that they could continue their children's cancer treatments. We put an end to all of that. We knew when we wrote the bill it was going to need some work, that a lot of things would happen with the bill that maybe were unforeseen, and that we could make changes along the way. Unfortunately, the Republicans never wanted to work with us to help improve the bill. They just wanted to repeal the bill. And the problem is they never had a replacement for the bill. And to this day, President Trump talks about this wonderful health insurance plan of his that's going to lower everyone's premium and cover everything, except we've never seen the plan because they don't have one. So if the Supreme Court tries to strike down the Affordable Care Act, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board, and we're going to have to go quickly and make sure that we cover people, and that's going to be very important. So we're going to wait and see what happens. My hope is that they don't strike down the bill, but we'll see what happens.
According to the American Journal of Medicine, in 2009, medical costs were the reason for 62% of bankruptcies in the United States, and also people who have pre-existing conditions, need to rely now on the Affordable Care Act because they were never able to get insurance before. So what would you say to people who rely on the Affordable Care Act for their health care, who maybe cannot afford it, and especially the people who have pre-existing conditions?
Yeah, so right now there's actually only about between 8 and 12 million people, Americans, who rely on the ACA. The rest are on, they like to group in several, tens of millions above that. Those are people on Medicare and Medicaid, not the ACA. So that's a number that you didn't cite, but that I've heard cited a lot. It's often misunderstood. There's actually very, very few who are specifically on the ACA. And then when we get to pre-existing conditions, the ACA does not cover all pre-existing conditions. I actually just talked to a mother who has a daughter with a pre-existing condition, and she pulled me aside specifically because she knows about my viewpoints and how I talk about the ACA, and she said, I want to make it clear to you, the ACA says that they care about pre-existing conditions. We have it. They don't cover my daughter. And here's how it works. If you don't identify a pre-existing condition in the first 6 weeks, you're not covered under the ACA. So she said, this is the pot that we fell into, and now we're screwed. We have nothing. So they love to tout this as a talking point on the left, and it's not entirely honest. It's not entirely true. And then on top of that, I'd say, yeah, it's not surprising to me that a lot of people struggle paying these medical bills, because really what happens is you're taxed twice. You're taxed once for a system like the ACA, and then the second tax is a hidden tax, what we were talking about, where the government gets that discounted rate. They get to pay $5 for a treatment, but you, the private consumer, your medical bills are much higher than that because you're making up for the difference for that government discounted price. Does that make sense? So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of people are having trouble paying bills. I just think we need to be specific with who's to blame here, and it's the government primarily.
Okay, yeah. So so something you did mention was maybe having private insurance on the free market. Would that be something that you would support?
Yeah, I would. And more than that, I'm a big fan of price transparency when it comes to private insurance and medical treatment. So seeing, let's say, for you, an x-ray costs $1, and for me, I come in and I say, okay, this hospital is offering a $1 x-ray, and then this hospital, for the same exact x-ray, wants to charge me $100. This is actually essentially happening behind the scenes right now. We see this happening with health insurers because your average American doesn't have the time or knowledge to go around comparing prices for x-rays and for treatments. So we need price transparency. That's another thing that I think could be brought into the free market, but it's not the government being the primary driver of the free market. And the free market, I believe, drives excellence, it drives accessibility, and it's going to drive better treatment.
We have more of those conversations coming up later in our program. But right now, we want to share with you some breaking poll results from Doyle and Negron. We have an updated poll with them. Mike Doyle is currently up 85.5% with 41,880 votes against Luke Negron, who has 14.5% of the votes with 7,125. That's in Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district, but over in our district in Pittsburgh, District 17, we have the race between Connor Lamb and challenger Sean Parnell. Connor Lamb is currently up 75.3% with 22,803 votes. He's the Democratic candidate, whereas on the other side, Sean Parnell has a total of 24.7% of the votes with 7,462 votes.
And during our first poll check that we came and told you about, we told you which states Trump and Biden have won so far. And now we're coming with new information on the percentage of votes that they won by. So we'll go over those. Trump has won Indiana 58% to 40%. He also won Kentucky 58% to 40% as well. Biden has won Vermont 64% to 30%. And another update from South Carolina, the South Carolina Senate race against Jamie Harrison and Lindsey Graham. Jamie Harrison is at 47.6%, while Lindsey Graham is at 51.13%. Now, we don't know exactly how many votes each candidate has so far, but we do know, what we can tell you is that there have been 329.6 thousand votes tallied as of now.
And moving on to Alabama, we have the Democratic Doug Jones. He is at, it's changing on my screen, 52.38% against his challenger, Tommy Tuberville, one of the races that we're keeping an eye on. He has 47.62% of the votes with 13.6K votes counted. That's according to the Associated Press. And also this just in Maine, Susan Collins has currently 68.01% of the vote, whereas her challenger, Sarah Gideon, has 25.68. That's with 1.5K votes counted. And of course, we're broadcasting tonight from Point Park Center for Media Innovation. The CMI team has been working hard to plan a socially distanced watch party on campus. Sam Hyman is there now. How's the weather there, Sam?
Things are getting a little chilly out here in Village Park. Things are also certainly heating up. We've got people packing in and it's looking very lively. However, don't worry, we are following proper social distancing guidelines. Everybody's maxed up, and we do have a max capacity here at Village Park, capped out at 50 people. But as far as festivities go, things are looking really great. Everyone's hanging out and having a really nice time. We got some music playing, and not to mention plenty of food. Culinart has a pop-up cafe featuring lots of things, all for free. We have sauerkraut and kibasi, hot dogs, cupcakes, and we even have hot chocolate in the s'mores bar. So let me bring some people over and see how they're having fun in the election night so far. Come on over, guys. All right, can you go ahead and just tell me your names, please?
I'm Patrick Mayoral.
I'm Marguerite Reed. All right, awesome. So can you give me some thoughts so far about the election and how you're feeling in general about tonight?
I'm a little anxious just because no matter who wins, I'm afraid there's going to be rioting, and I'm not here for that.
I'm a little nervous. The polls just officially closed, I think, a minute ago, so I think it's setting in now the reality of everything, and now we just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. Did you guys go out and vote today, or did you mail in your ballots? What did you guys do?
I'm from California originally, so I mailed in my ballot, I think about a month and a half ago.
I'm from Illinois. I mailed in my ballot on October 20th.
Yeah, that's a really great thing about Point Park. We have people from all over the place. So are you enjoying the festivities? Have you guys had anything to eat?
Oh, it's really great. They have cupcakes, and they have s'mores over there, hot chocolate, apple cider.
I had some hot chocolate. It was delicious.
All right, that is awesome. Thank you guys so much. Are you guys going to have any other friends stop down tonight?
Maybe we'll see.
I invited some people. Hopefully they'll come for the mac and cheese bites, maybe.
Oh yeah, mac and cheese bites. That sounds really good right now. Yeah, it's looking like we're probably going to get more packed a little bit later as things just sort of started getting kicked off. But things are already definitely interesting. There's people over there socializing. We have people eating food. We have obviously our election show broadcast playing. And things are looking really great. So thus far, considering the election and stuff, do you think that you're going to get results that you're satisfied with? How do you think that's going to work out?
I am optimistic that the country will move in a more peaceful and inclusive direction. I just hope that everyone comes to a peaceful solution and one where we can come together as a country under one president and as one nation.
Very well said.
I think what's important to remember about this election is that the results that come out tonight are not the final word because of the millions of Americans that sent in their mail-in ballots. So I think the important thing to remember for all Americans is to remember to stay peaceful and stay relaxed despite whatever results we get tonight, because in a week they could totally change.
That is very well said, both of you. Thank you very much. All right, back to you guys.
All right, thanks so much, Sam. Coming up, COVID-19 has thrown a wrench into our election process, to say the least. How can people vote safely by voting in person? We'll be right back.
watching history happen here on Election Night 2020. But of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag #PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night.
Poll workers started counting absentee ballots today, a process that could take days or even weeks. But how do those who plan to vote in person today stay safe and be heard? Zoe Angelucci has that story.
I'm going to be going home to my hometown where I was registered when I was 18 and voting in person.
This election, I'm going to be voting via mail-in ballot. I just decided it was easier that way than just going in. No, I never considered voting in person. I thought since Allegheny County already has kind of a spike in cases that it'd be safer for me to do it from home.
I did not think of mailing in my ballot, and the reason for that is come November, there are going to be certain results that certain people aren't happy with, and there's going to be uneasiness, there's going to be fraud claims, so I would rather just have my vote secure. Personally, I don't have any concerns going into this election because I'm going back to my hometown where I was registered when I was 18, and it's a very small town, and the voting, I've voted I think twice there now, and I've barely ever seen any other people besides the people working the polls, so it doesn't freak me out as much as if I were voting here in downtown and having to wait with like 100 people for 3 hours.
I think my concern with the whole COVID aspect is that people aren't going to be wearing masks as often when they're going in to vote. So like I said, with the spike, it could increase it. A lot of people in Allegheny County do wear their masks, but they also don't, so it could fluctuate a little bit.
We have a quick poll result for you right now. Marley, let's talk about Kentucky.
Yeah, so breaking news, the Kentucky polls are closed, and we have an update on the numbers for Mitch McConnell and Amy McGrath. Mitch McConnell has won 57.69% to Amy McGrath. She has 38.46%, and a total of 1.7 million votes have been tallied.
And we don't have an update on any states that have been officially won, but we do have some progress results, if you will. Texas, a state that we mentioned earlier, in breaking fashion, Biden is currently leading in Texas. 50% of the vote is toward him, whereas Donald Trump, who had Texas in 2016, has 48.6% of the votes. Now, only 64% of the total votes in Texas have been counted, whereas in Florida, 91% of the votes have been tallied. Biden is trailing 48.3% to Donald Trump's 50.7%, and in North Carolina, Trump has 47.2% to Biden's 51.7%, with 73% of the votes tallied. Marley, Texas and Florida, two states that we talked about earlier, turned red in 2016. One heading in that direction still, 91% votes tallied. I really want to talk about Texas. That's insane.
Yeah, let's talk about that right off the bat. So I know it's still close, 50% and 48.6%, but still that's kind of surprising. Both Texas and Florida have been Republican for the past several presidential debates, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it's going to turn out.
Yeah, just a quick little anecdote about Texas. It's been a really historically red state, obviously. I have a great uncle who's from Texas that I was talking to the other day, and he voted independently this year because he said he didn't like either of the candidates. So I'm also going to be curious to see what percent, not even just in Texas, but in the United States in general, votes for the independent candidate, Joe Jorgensen, just to see what is going on,
Exactly, yeah, and still close races, but we'll, of course, be sure to check in and follow with any updates that we get on those states. Now, Point Park University President Paul Hennigan announced earlier this year that he'll be retiring following the 2020-2021 school year. UVU's Colton Tobias sat down with him to discuss challenges, accomplishments, and his view on the current political landscape.
The bias in the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University, as I am sitting down with Point Park University President Paul Hennigan. Dr. Hennigan, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to be with us, and also congratulations on your well-deserved retirement.
Oh, thank you very much, Colton. I appreciate you inviting me, and I just want to make sure that we say for everybody out there that you and I came into the studio, we got everything set up, and then we just removed our face masks, and it's good to know that we're distanced and ready to do a nice discussion.
Yeah, that's right, Dr. Hennigan. Yeah, so Dr. Hennigan, I would like to talk about your experience in politics before knowing that your undergrad is in political science from Edinburgh University. So why did you decide to get into politics in the first place?
Well, actually, I wouldn't say that I was in politics. I studied political science as an undergraduate student, and there's a big difference between politicians and those who work in the government. So I don't think I had an interest in politics at that point in my life, although I was the president of the student government, so I guess that was politics. But I had more of an interest in working for the government. And so the people who work for the government are the folks that keep government moving, especially through elections and through a democracy. And that was more my interest than politics.
Oh, okay. So what did you do in government before you came to Point Park?
So I was the chief financial officer for the city of Pittsburgh, and I worked for Mayor Tom Murphy in the first 6 years of his 12 years. So Tom, the mayor, he was the politician, and then I was a member of the cabinet, a member of the administration.
How were you able to get that cabinet position, and what drew you to work for Mayor Murphy?
Well, not long after college, I worked in the governor's office in the governor's management training program in Pennsylvania. But again, I wasn't in a political position. I was in a management intern position with a graduate degree. And I was really fascinated with how government was working. And then after that, I worked at Carnegie Mellon for 6 years as a consultant to the government of Allegheny County. And there I had the opportunity to interact with all of the politicians, all of the elected row officers, and I knew I didn't want to do that, but I was working on the management side, and we were redesigning county government, which actually led to the current form of government that we have right now in Allegheny County. And it was from there that one of the county managers moved over to the city of Pittsburgh right after Tom Murphy was elected mayor, and he asked me to put my name in the hat to be considered for one of the cabinet level positions. I was a very young man at the time. I really didn't think I stood a chance because I was in my early 30s, and I did my first interview, my second interview, and my third interview was with the mayor-elect, and then I got a phone call to go and serve the mayor.
Why did you decide to leave that position that you had with the government and then come to Point Park?
Well, that's a good question. We were halfway through the mayor's second term, and they were gearing up to run for a third term. And I had been there for 6 years. That's a big job. And I felt like I needed a change, and I felt like it would be good for the administration and the city to have a change as well. And rather than wait till we got closer to the election, I decided that midway through the mayor's second term, that would be a good time for me to leave and a good time for him to find somebody else to replace me.
Okay. Did you ever expect, though, that you would get into education at all, though, when you were a undergrad student at Edinburgh?
Well, I can't say that I thought that I would, but I will tell you that when I was in my junior year at Edinburgh as the president of the student government, I can remember interacting frequently with the president of the school and thinking to myself, this is a really big job. Who would want to do a job like this? So I did have some early exposure to the president of the university as well as his administration. And then when I fast forward to the point in my life when I did become president here at Point Park, I thought back at that point in time when I was a student.
Okay. And so what do you think is at stake in this election, knowing that you have worked in government yourself in the past?
Well, I've studied government and U.S. administrations for years, and I think that there is probably more at stake for the country in this election than I've seen perhaps since I was in college. The country is divided, and that's not what the United States is about. It's the United States of America. And so I think that bringing the country back together, finding the way to bring the country back together, is probably one of the biggest issues at stake. And it's not the first time the country's been through this. The country has gone through other divisive times. We had a war, we had a civil war over the division of this country. So it's not the first time that the U.S., the United States of America, has had to figure out how to repair its wounds and pull itself back together for the sake of the whole country.
Do you think that this is like the first time in your lifetime that you personally have actually seen this country as divided?
In my lifetime. So I was alive during the Vietnam War, though I was a young child at the time. I do remember the country being very divided over the Vietnam War. So I saw it, but I didn't quite fully understand it as I do now looking back on the history of the Vietnam War. But since the Vietnam War, I would say that the country is more divided than it's ever been.
Okay. Well, Dr. Hennigan, thank you so much for your time today. And once again, we wish you best of luck in retirement.
Well, thank you very much. And I congratulate you, Colton, and all of your fellow student colleagues and the professionals who are working here on election night. I think it's great what you're doing, and I think that it's an outstanding educational experience for you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hennigan. I really appreciate it, and I cannot agree more. I just have loved working on this election show with everybody that we will send it back to live in the studio.
Our partners at WPPJ Radio will be checking in with us throughout the broadcast this evening. Nick Tomarello is over in the PJ studio now for a special interview with the director of the Center for Media Innovation, Andy Conti, to talk about the media's coverage of this election season and the stories that organizations across the area are telling. Nick?
Welcome back to WPPJ Radio. I'm Nick Tomarello, the news director here at PPJ. Joining us in studio is Andy Conti, the director of the Center for Media Innovation here at Point Park University, and also a media columnist for Next Pittsburgh. But Andy, before we get to our conversation, I want to check in with Alexis. Alexis, you have a lot of updates for the polls. Go ahead and take it away.
Right now, one of the most important updates is Florida. It seems like Florida always has some confusion going on. They have 92% of their results in, but they still have not called that race. The New York Times and the Associated Press have been reporting that Trump is leading by a 2.6% margin, so we need to keep a close eye on them. We have a few governor races that have been called. Governor Phil Scott will win re-election in Vermont with 29% of the vote reported. Governor John Carney, a Democrat from Delaware, will also win re-election. Governor Doug Burgum, a Republican, will win re-election in North Dakota. And we do have a huge announcement in the Senate. So Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has won re-election in Kentucky, which has been hugely contested this year because of his approval of the Amy Coney Barrett nomination to the Supreme Court. Currently, we do have two states that we will call right now. NBC News and the Associated Press has called the race in Arkansas as a victory for Donald Trump with 12% of the vote recorded. He currently has about a 67.4% lead. Virginia has also been called as a victory for Vice President Biden by AP projections and CBS News. Vote-wise, President Trump is in the lead there, but they are assuming that we're going to get a whole bunch of votes in from most of their blue counties. From the official Pennsylvania election results, we are seeing a straight Democratic sweep right now for the four main elections. Joe Biden is currently in the lead with 73.66% of the votes. Right now, the election may actually be down to who wins Pennsylvania. We might not know for days, weeks. We hope not. We hope not weeks. We have very valuable 20 electoral votes. So the road to 270 for either candidate right now is still undecided, and we will just have to wait and see.
Right, and as I believe Carlos said previously, the ballots can be returned by Friday, but they have to be postmarked by today, any absentee ballots. And then I believe the Supreme Court case, the United States Supreme Court didn't even decide to hear the case. But that didn't mean that they wouldn't look at it after the election. So who knows? Ballots that come in after today may not even be counted.
Yeah, no, it's been widely contested in Pennsylvania. A lot of people are on the edge of their seats wondering if my ballot is going to be counted. So for a lot of the people here in the Keystone State, there's a lot of uncertainty right now.
Well, Alexis, thank you so much. And of course, we'll check back in with Alexis in our next segment. But now I'd like to move over to my conversation with Andy Conti, again, the director here at the Center for Media Innovation. First, thanks for letting us use this space for the broadcast.
This is your space. I'm so glad you guys are here using it. Yeah.
And you are a media columnist at Next Pittsburgh. So we were actually talking earlier about what the media is doing this election cycle. And we talked about how the New York Post published a story about Hunter Biden's laptop. So if you could tell us a little bit about what that story was about and how did the media respond to that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. As opposed to 4 years ago when there was so much of a focus on Hillary Clinton's emails and, whatever, it was sort of a manufactured scandal around what was in her emails. And Trump very successfully used that to create a lot of uncertainty about her and sort of create, people at his rallies were shouting, lock her up, because,
right.
He portrayed it that way. When in reality, there was no crime that was, it wasn't even close to being a crime. Again, this time, there's been interesting reporting about the reporting, which is very rare to see as well. But this time, the New York Times has done a couple of stories about how the Trump campaign tried to get a story placed in the Wall Street Journal about Hunter Biden's emails. This was Hunter Biden is Joe Biden's son, and there's been these allegations that maybe he did something improper by serving on the board of an energy company in Ukraine and then some other international dealings. And it's all been debunked. It's all been investigated and said he didn't do anything wrong. But the Trump campaign came forward with the story that this computer repairman in Delaware had this laptop that was left in his store, and the laptop purportedly had these emails it was Hunter Biden's laptop, and it had these emails showing he'd done all these nefarious things. They tried to get the story placed in the Wall Street Journal, and the Journal was taking a long time trying to fact check it and finding out that it just wasn't holding up. And so then Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer and confidant, took it to the New York Post, and the Post actually ran with the story. But even when that story came out, then a lot of other media outlets refused to carry the story or repeat the story because they couldn't independently verify it. And interestingly, this time too, social media stepped in, and Twitter and Facebook put severe restrictions on how people could share that information. And so the story didn't really go anywhere. I think people who were paying attention to politics were aware of it, but it didn't have that same stain as like the Hillary emails. And it was interesting this time because a lot of the media gatekeepers, the publishers and editors and journalists at different news outlets, just made a conscious decision not to be manipulated. They weren't going to be part of a smear campaign.
And I know that you also, in terms of writing your column specifically, you recently just posted, I want to say a week or so ago, about newspapers endorsing political candidates. So how do newspapers do this while also staying impartial in their reporting?
Yeah, so newspapers have always been very clear about, there's the news section of the newspaper, and then there's the opinion section, and it's clearly identified and marked, and everyone looking at it knew that this was the opinions, and often it was the opinion of the publisher. And Pittsburgh's an interesting case because you used to have the Tribune Review used to be owned by Richard Scaife, and he was a conservative billionaire. And so the paper had a conservative bent to it, and the Post-Gazette had a very liberal bent to it.
And we're seeing that change now.
The union paper, and now it's completely changed. The Tribune Review actually doesn't do endorsements any longer. Scaife died in 2014, and the paper at that point said, well, we're just going to reflect what the community's saying. We're not going to make any judgments about candidates any longer. The Post-Gazette, meanwhile, totally flip-flopped, and they ended up endorsing Trump this time. The last time they got around doing an endorsement because they laid out like the 20 questions that people should ask about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And then you could kind of figure out in your own, like, oh, who should it be? And it was sort of a backhanded way of them endorsing Trump. This time there was no backhanded. They just came out and said, we think Trump's the better candidate, and here are the reasons why. And there's been a huge backlash to the point where their executive editor today put out a statement saying, look, there's a big difference between the news hole and the opinion. You need to know that, there's a firewall, and the people who believe in those opinions don't also run the newsroom. It's funny that he said firewall because up until 6 weeks ago, the guy who runs the opinions was also in charge of the news. And
Right.
so it's a complicated situation there at the Post-Gazette.
Should newspapers continue to do this? Is this something that you may see go away in the future? Or what pull do newspapers have anymore in endorsing candidates?
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I worked at a newspaper in Florida 15 years ago, 20 years ago, people actually came to the polls with the newspaper. They had clipped out the endorsements from the newspaper, and they were like, I was like, what are you doing? They're like, we're going to go vote how the newspaper told us to vote. That doesn't really happen anymore, at least not that I've ever seen. And, whether newspapers should do it, I think it's okay for newspapers to do it as long as it's clearly identified that this is our opinion. It becomes a concern when it's like, this is our opinion, but it's also it colors our news coverage. And that's been the big change, too, in media, is that journalists used to try to be objective. And we've seen over the last 4 years a lot of news outlets say, well, we can't afford to just be objective. And it's irresponsible for us to say we're objective. We all have feelings about this. Let's be subjective. Let's be clear about our opinions. And then as long as people are aware of where we're coming from, then they can judge whether the news has value or not.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, right? Because I think back then, or even as I was growing up, journalism was, you can't have opinions. And even now I still try to follow that as much as possible personally. But now it almost seems like that's changing, and maybe more in broadcast media itself. So is it really just the personal journalist sort of owning their own biases and then using that to report in a way?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting. Like, of all the student journalists I know on campus, you're the only one who's like an enigma, I think. You've gone out of your way to, of the ones I know, like
Sure.
A lot of students are very clear about their opinions, and then they're, saying, well, we're going to just go and tell stories, fact-based stories anyway.
Right.
You've made
Right.
a conscious effort to, from what I've seen, to not reveal what your opinions are, which makes it a mystery to me. But
and hopefully it stays that way.
yeah, and I think that's probably there's definitely value in that as a journalist. When I worked at the Tribune Review, which was the conservative paper, a lot of people assumed that I was conservative, but I registered as a Democrat because in Allegheny County, if you're not a Democrat, you don't really get to vote in a lot of the primaries. A lot of the elections are decided during the primary, and so you need to be involved in that way. I also felt it was important for me to sort of balance out the paper versus myself.
Right. And you also, I think in the column before last week's, wrote on how local media is covering the election. What are some of the things that they've shared with you?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. Local media has gone through such downsizing and disruption that it's not what it was before, and so it's really challenging for the media to cover anything really, and let alone things like an election. And so it's been a challenge for local media outlets to do those stories.
And, President Trump in the past has called the press the enemy of the people. Do you think that he actually means this, or is he trying to, in a way, use his words to maybe help rile up his supporters? Why does he say that the press is the enemy of the people? And then why does he call the news fake whenever it may just be something that's critical of him and not actually incorrect or wrong?
Yeah, he's been very successful at positioning the media as someone in opposition to him. That he, every time somebody asks him a challenging question, he paints them as either a fake news, that this is made up, or enemy of the people. And so it allows him to go to his supporters then and say, well, they're asking all these ridiculous questions of me. They're asking, how dare Bob Woodward ask me about how I treated the coronavirus, because he's out to get me. They're all out to get me. We're going to find out tonight whether that strategy worked or not.
Is the press unfair to President Trump?
I don't think so. I think they've been, we had Jim Acosta from CNN here at the
not too long ago.
CMI in February.
It feels like it was forever ago.
It was right before COVID. It was our, we actually sold out the Pittsburgh Playhouse. We had a big house that night. It was one of the last public events, really. And, he's portrayed as this person who is a liberal because he asks difficult questions of Trump. I don't think that's fair. He's asking difficult questions of everybody in power. That's what we're supposed to do as journalists, ask difficult questions, hold people in power accountable. But because of the way Trump responds to that and says, well, you asked me a difficult question, you're my enemy and you're the enemy of the people and you're fake news, then it sets up those reporters who are asking difficult questions to look like they're being unfair to the president. That's their job. They're supposed to be a check on the president.
Andy Conti is the director at the Center for Media Innovation and, of course, a media columnist for Next Pittsburgh. Andy, thank you so much for joining us again. And Alexis, thank you for your updates. Of course, make sure you stay tuned to UView's coverage. And, of course, you can listen to us on WPPJradio.com or watch us on the stream. We'll be back with more stories, more interviews, and, of course, more poll updates. I'm Nick Tomarello, news director at WPPJ. Now let's head it back over to our friends next door at UView.
Thank you so much, Nick and Andy. When we come back, the economy has been a hot topic in the world of politics, and COVID-19 has made it more prevalent than ever before. Our correspondent met with local businesses to see how they're coping with COVID-19 adjustments.
And I sat down with a senior international student to touch base on our world of politics from her perspective. We'll be right back.
Hey man, what's up?
Pretty good.
I see you're still smoking. You know smoking helps you age faster, right?
Nah, that's only a myth. Do I really look that old?
Hey man, what's up?
Pretty good.
I see you're still smoking. You know smoking helps you age faster, right?
Nah, that's only a myth. Do I really look that old?
Watching history happen here on Election Night 2020. But of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag #PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night.
Welcome back. We want to share some breaking poll results with you right now. Just as we went into break, it has been reported that Texas is tied. Very not expected. 66% of the votes are tallied. Both Biden and Trump have 49.3% of the votes. Now, of course, this is expected to change throughout the night with only 66% of the votes counted, but to have not only Biden leading, but now them being tied is something that has been unprecedented in the state of Texas, to have the Republican and Democrat this close.
Exactly, and we can only expect that close race to continue as the night goes on. We also have additional states that both Trump and Biden have won. Trump has also won North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Louisiana, and Nebraska, while Biden has won New York, New Mexico, Connecticut, and Colorado.
All states that the candidate was expected to win. We're still waiting on some of those results from those swing states that we mentioned, but it's worth noting that these states make up a good chunk of the states that they're expected to win throughout the night. Well, this school year may not have been even possible for students like Vanessa Vivas. The Trump administration announced just days after Independence Day that international students cannot study in America if their universities are fully online. Not all universities complied, and Point Park announced a high flex model with both semi-in-person and online classes offered. Vivas spoke with UView in 2018, and I got the chance to talk to her again about living in today's politics as an international student. Hello everyone, my name is Taylor Sperito. I hope you're enjoying the program so far. Today I'm sitting down with performance and practice major. She's a senior. Her name is Vanessa Vivas. She's from Venezuela. Hi Vanessa, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
So we had you on our midterm show back in 2018. So some people may be familiar with you, some not. So just a quick background, you're from Venezuela. Where exactly are you from?
So I was born in Maracay, Venezuela, which is a small mountain town like 2 hours from the capital. And when I was 8 years old, my family moved abroad to a tiny country in the Middle East called Qatar. And I grew up there basically for all of my teenager years, my teen years. And then I moved to the U.S. to Pittsburgh for college when I was 17.
Very different experience than Pittsburgh. You know,
so different.
Coming from a mountain town and then, you know, tiny island up to here, insane.
It's really crazy to go from a tropical kind of childhood and then to go to a desert and then to move to Pittsburgh where the winters are absolutely insane. So.
Yeah, no one really knows how to handle them here. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I think that I was very unprepared. No one told me how to layer. Now I'm a absolute expert, but no one really taught me at the now I have 3 years under my belt, so I get it.
So elections are so different everywhere you go. So how were elections run in Venezuela?
So I have very, very limited experiences with voting and elections, just because when I was in Venezuela, I was from years 0 to 8. Right. So I didn't really have the exposure or the possibility of talking about politics in the sense where I could participate in politics. Although I did actually participate in a lot of marches and a lot of protests back then when I was younger, and we actually had these sort of like traditions. It's not really a tradition. It was a protest, but inside our home, where the whole building would just sync up and we would all take pots and pans and start hitting them at the same time. And I remember that image very clearly because there was this huge political movement against the rising politician Chavez, and he was elected, and then he kind of overstayed his position of power and abused it. So I remember very clearly at 8 years old being very politically involved in protesting, even with just an 8-year-old just would be banging pots and pans. Like if you go back through my brain, that's what you see. But something I do remember is that voting was in person, and there was always it was like a fingerprint process. So adults that were of voting age would, I think it's 18, the voting age is 18, they would dip their finger in this purple ink, and then you'd put it on the paper and send it in. And it was, I think, at in-person voting at voting centers. So that's what I remember. I remember seeing all of my my family, the adults in my family, have the purple ink on their pinky. So I remember I like took a pen and I like would draw on it. I'd be like, look, I voted too. And like, I was like 8 years old, like, oh, look, purple.
It's like the same thing as giving your kid the I voted sticker.
Basically, it's the exact same thing, but it's just like the purple. Like that's the image I remember.
So you talked about, the political climate in Venezuela when you were a child. How is it like now? Do you know?
Yes. So my entire family, except for my immediate family, is still there. And it's actually gotten a lot more intense in the sense that it's become violent, it's become civil war-ish, it's become almost like a failed state. But it's also in the sense, there's a double-edged sword with everything. The positive of that is that it's getting attention from the rest of the world and it's getting attention from democracies around the world. So
yeah, I remember learning about it here, like nationally.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. I remember when I moved to Qatar, the movement was still happening, but it was muted, and it was like people would understand. They'd be like, yeah, there's problems in Venezuela, but they didn't really know how bad it was until the protests in 2014 started happening, and students were actually killed on the street by the police and part of the government institutions. And so that's when the world started paying attention, like 2014, 2015, and now it's to the point where it's because of COVID. The hospitals don't have any medicine. They don't have any access to the materials they need to take care and of people. And this was a problem before COVID, where hospitals didn't have access to any of this. And now with COVID, it's another layer.
Like 10 times worse.
It's like a hat on a hat, and it just doesn't. It's an absolute mess, really.
Yeah.
But my family's like my family back home in Qatar, my immediate family is very caring with the rest of my extended family back home in Venezuela, because they will, every time that we come to the US for the summer, we will go to like Walmart, go on a Walmart run and like send boxes, and it's really heartbreaking because there are whole companies that are designed for Venezuelan families who are in Florida, for example, to send things to Venezuela. There are whole companies that are catered to that it's like, this is our mission as a company, is to take these boxes of products, food, medicine, paper towels that we sent and deliver to your family in Venezuela. The fact that there's a company that is designed to do that shows the problem, the huge, huge, huge problem that is happening in Venezuela.
And you talked about, what your family tells you about what's going on, and obviously what you see on the news. Kind of flipping that on its head, what are you telling your family back home about living in the United States during this time of COVID, during the 2020 election, during this time period where everything seems to just be doing a complete 180?
That's a good question. I think that it's tricky because I always hesitate telling my family if I had a bad day. I always hesitate, and it's always such a tiptoeing, walking on eggshells kind of thing, because I know they won't criticize me for any reason to be like, oh, you have nothing to complain about, you have access to all these things. But I know me as a person, if you talk to any of my friends, I'm such a person that focuses on the positives all the time. And even though there is a very polarized environment in the US right now, I think that it's democracy at its finest in a way, and I can't complain about that, if that makes sense. So I tell my cousins when I talk to them, oh, it's hard because I'm a theater major and theater's illegal. But I also tell them, but, we're going to push through it and we're going to be okay, and I'm going to see you guys one day again and we'll reunite and it'll be good. And I mean, I feel like I'm probably the only person in my extended family that is in the US right now. And I think it's everybody's dream to be in the US in my family. And so I feel like they're living through me a little bit. So I do have kind of like a posture when it comes to talking to them, because I don't really want to take things for granted. I really don't. And things aren't ideal in the US at all with COVID cases. I think that it's showcased a lot of the American culture and its obsession with freedom.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's access to medicine and food and all these things, and I can never ignore that.
Thank you to Vanessa Vivas for sitting down with me. And some of our interviews have been shortened due to timing constraints, but you can catch our full interviews on our YouTube page after tonight's election show.
Now, businesses were hit hard after governments ordered closures and limited seating due to the pandemic.
Trish Mirayes has a story on how a local restaurant was able to survive.
Businesses have taken out a PPP loan to stay afloat. Red Start Roasters Cafe was able to survive all on its own.
I didn't feel like we needed it, and I wanted to, leave that for the people that felt like they did. We've been remarkably stable and haven't seen any substantial hardship in that regard to where I would have just felt bad if I got any money.
With a pandemic, cafes typically avoid the pitfalls faced by many restaurants.
In terms of the cafe, it's generally a to-go business to begin with, so it's not like, bars and most restaurants. They're not based on the concept of getting as many people in here as possible.
Beyond cafe sales, part of the revenue comes from wholesale distribution to other cafes.
I felt better about doing this because I could see all of our customers are cafes and they're doing more or less just fine.
And when we asked what the main reason was for their success, he said,
we started doing farmers markets last year, and just the level of sort of customer engagement with the bird friendly certification and just what we were doing, and it resonated with people in a way. And it wasn't until I had hundreds of people tell me, hey, you should open a cafe, and also in East Liberty. We're 100% here because of our customers.
For those in similar circumstances, Parmalee has a small piece of advice.
Don't try to be good at everything. If you can tell by our menu, we're not trying to be good at everything. We picked some things and we're good at those. Collaborating is a big part of everything we do. For example, we're doing our pastries we're not doing them ourselves. We're getting them from friends we've made along the way. We're trying to showcase what they're doing because our focus isn't food. We want to show off other people who have that passion. So put yourself out there and have sort of a community presence has really benefited us in a big way.
Sam Hindman has been talking with students at our election night watch party, and she joins us once again. Sam, what are students' thoughts on the election so far?
Are certainly heating up. We have so many students coming in, and it's really great to see Point Park caring so much about the democratic process and really getting involved with this election night party. And speaking of the democratic process, here I have the president of SGA. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, like you said, I'm the president of the Student Government Association at Point Park. My name's Dennis McDermott, and I'm a junior political science major here, so that's all about me. Yeah.
All right, that's amazing. So would you like to talk a little bit about SGA, maybe how to get involved and what you're primarily doing out here tonight?
Yeah, so right now for SGA, we're just having this table here. We're collecting some student concerns if you want to write down some things you'd like to see fixed at the university. And we're also giving free gavels, free stress gavels, mind you, to people who have voted today. So that's another thing we'd like to do. And if you want to get involved with SGA, we have open slots for senators still. I think we're going to be doing some spring elections later as well. It's super easy to do. Just give me an email. And if you just look me up at the Point Park database and let me know you'd be interested, I'll get you appointed within the week. So that's something we'd like to do as well. We have a large number of senators this year, and I'd like to get it all the way up to full. So yeah, let me know, and I'm right here. So.
Thank you very much. So are you enjoying the festivities so far at the election party? Have you had anything to eat? Are you meeting any friends out here? Anything of that nature?
Yeah, I've had some s'mores because they're free, and some hot chocolate because it's free, and some food because it's also free. And as college students, we tend to gravitate to that sort of thing. I'm not sure why, but there's just a lot of fun things going on here. I've been talking to a lot of people that have been making me feel a lot better about everything because I've been stressed about this for weeks, and I just hope we can make them feel a little better about everything going on. So yeah, it's just all been a lot of fun, way better than I could have ever anticipated, being this called out on a Tuesday night here. So yeah.
Yeah, it might be chilly, but I feel like the company of everyone out here, our Point Park community, is sort of coming together to really get involved and, think about real life things outside of our small college community is really great. It's really great to see everyone coming out here, and it's especially great to see the student government out here and taking student concerns and things of that nature. So thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, everything's looking great out here. Back to you.
And when we come back, Nardos Haile, co-news editor of The Globe, joins WPPJ to break down the Trump administration's response to COVID-19. And Nick Tomarello and I spoke with Point Park political science professor Nathan Firestone, who teaches a class called The American Presidency. We'll be answering them throughout the night.
watching History Happen Here on Election Night 2020. But of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night. Point Park political science professor Nathan Firestone has made a name for himself as not only a professor, but as a member of the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court and the Allegheny County Bar Association. WPPJ's Nick Tomarello and I sat down with him to talk about the world of politics as we know it today. We're watching Election Night 2020. I'm Marley Pinchak.
And I'm Nick Tomarello. Nathan Firestone is a professor of political science at Point Park University and joins us now. Professor Firestone, thanks for speaking with us.
It's nice to be here.
How has the American presidency changed under President Trump, and what would a Biden presidency look like?
Well, I don't know. I think a Biden presidency would look very much like many of the presidencies that preceded President Trump. That is a relatively normal, routine kind of presidency, confronting challenges either from a more liberal perspective, as Trump would obviously do, or from a more conservative presidency, as President Bush did, and President Bush's father. President Trump was, if nothing else, a very disruptive force in the way in which he conducted the office and in the objectives he had. The way in which he conducted the office, we know that he was incessantly on Twitter, And I'm not sure that that did him much good, although many of his followers liked it very much. The things he said, the way he said them, the very effective way to his followers, he was able to mobilize people through rallies and so on, is quite unusual, and it's certainly something different than the founding fathers ever contemplated, because their greatest fear was a fear of a demagogue, somebody who would appeal to the public directly rather than working through the institutions. And President Trump believes that the institutions themselves have captured the American political process and are not working in the ultimate interest of the American people. And he is out to challenge that also. And as I said, many people feel that that's appropriate. Obviously, others do not. And as we know, there are a large number of Republicans, or I'm not sure about numbers, let's say a significant number of Republicans who are disaffected, such as those in the Lincoln Project or others Republicans against Trump, who reject that approach and would like to return to something more traditional, and have even indicated they would be willing to vote for Biden because of that.
And what would happen if either candidate decides to challenge the results? So what is that process
Well,
look
we've
like?
had one instance in which there's been at least in modern times, in which there's been a legal challenge. That took place in the year 2000, when the Florida Supreme Court called for a recount in the Florida popular vote because of the irregularities of the ballots. And the Republicans sought the federal courts to enjoin that. And ultimately the case went to the Supreme Court in the famous case of Bush versus Gore in 2000. I'll be teaching that again next term. I'm doing a course on election law. And that was a challenge. But when the when the Supreme Court decided that the recount had to stop because due process rights were, Republican due process rights were violated, that was the end of it. And as we know, as unhappy as he might have been and as unhappy as the Democrats were, they accepted the result. That is the conclusion we can say about 2000. I don't know what will happen now. President Trump has said before, no candidate has said this before, certainly no president, because I don't think it's been an issue before, has said that in the event that he were to lose, the results would probably be rigged, and it would be the consequence of some kind of fake news or whatever he calls it. And that in itself has predisposed many people who are Trump supporters to question whether the results are legitimate at all. And that makes the entire system different.
And finally, in your classes, how do you manage discussions between students with different political views?
Well, I don't encourage arguments in areas where there is not going to be any kind of rational resolution. For instance, questions about abortion and so on. I'll be happy to talk about the differing approaches legally to that issue. But when we come to, are you in favor of pro-life, pro-choice, whatever they call it, that's not really productive. In this case, I don't ask students, are you pro-Trump, are you pro-Biden or whatever. I simply try to suggest what the issues are and how candidates approach the issues differently and what the consequences of differing approaches are.
Now, Nathan Firestone is a professor of political science here at Point Park University, more than 50 years of experience.
Not more than, just.
Oh, just, excuse me.
I'm not that old, you know.
You have very hearty information. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Nardos Haile is the co-news editor of The Globe and has been following the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus. She joins WPPJ now to discuss.
Welcome back to WPPJ's live election night coverage, streaming on WPPJradio.com and UView Television. The coronavirus pandemic has devastated our country and the world. According to the COVID Tracking Project and the New York Times, more than 9 million people in the United States and 46 million people around the world contracted the coronavirus. Upwards of 200,000 people have died in America, with over 1 million deaths worldwide. You've probably heard it time and time again. The CDC recommends to clean your hands often with soap and water for 20 seconds, avoid close contact with people who are sick, social distance, and cover both your mouth and nose with a mask because they can help prevent the spread of the virus from person to person. The CDC says that coronavirus mainly spreads through respiratory droplets when an infected person coughs or sneezes. The World Health Organization says that people of all ages can be infected, but older people and people with pre-existing medical conditions, quote, appear to be more vulnerable to becoming severely ill with the virus. The Federal Drug Administration still has not approved a COVID-19 vaccine, stating that they are working with developers and other researchers and manufacturers to help expedite the development. The president's campaign has not officially released a plan for COVID-19 in his potential second term, but the president hopes to begin distributing vaccines by the end of the year. According to the Health and Human Services, Operation Warp Speed hopes to produce and deliver 300 million doses of the vaccine, with initial doses available every year in January. Joe Biden's campaign has a lengthy plan to combat coronavirus and prepare for future global health threats. He plans to make testing available for free, eliminate cost barriers of preventative care and treatment, develop a vaccine, give emergency paid leave for people affected by the outbreak, and provide support to workers, families, and small businesses. Our poll checker for the night, Alexis Bonifate, has been following the results. Do we have any updates?
Yeah, we have a few states that are especially important to watch right now. Texas has been on the minds of people across the nation. Texas usually is a Republican voting state, but it has been highly contested. Right now, USA Today is reporting with around 64% of the vote reported that Donald Trump has a 0.7% margin. If Joe Biden can become victorious in that state, that will be the first time that a Democratic candidate has won since 1976 during the election of President Jimmy Carter. We can also call states at this point. Kentucky, according to CBS News and CNN and the Associated Press, can now officially be called as a Donald Trump victory. That one was not super unexpected, as Donald Trump did win Kentucky in 2016. Mm-hmm. Right now, North Dakota and South Dakota will also go to President Trump. Each of those have free electoral votes. CNN and the Associated Press has called Joe Biden's victory in Colorado with 9 electoral votes. Also in Colorado, the Democrat John Hickenlooper, who was actually a former 2020 presidential candidate, has won election to the U.S. Senate, beating incumbent Senator Cory Gardner. Right now in Florida, we do have a race that is too close to call. Trump still is maintaining a 3% lead, which could be crucial as it is a battleground state. In the state of Pennsylvania, we're actually looking at a Donald Trump lead right now with 50.59% for him and Joe Biden at 48.25%. Each of them have about 500,000 plus votes. For the Attorney General race, Josh Shapiro is still narrowly in the lead, the Democrat, and the incumbent on that side. Auditor General Nina Ahmad is still in the lead. Or actually, no, she is not in the lead right now.
Oh, really?
The Republican has taken over that with 51%. And lastly, Joe Torsello is actually losing to Stacey Garrity for the Republican for state treasurer. So a lot of stuff has changed in Pennsylvania right now, but we will keep you updated throughout the night.
All right. Thank you very much, Alexis. Joining us now to talk about COVID-19 is Nardos Haile. Nardos is the co-news editor of The Globe. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So President Trump and others in his administration tested positive for coronavirus in early October. How many tested positive and who were they?
Well, it was a lot of people. First of all, we're going to start with President Trump. A lot of his cabinet members were testing positive, his press secretary, a lot more smaller advisors as well were testing positive. So it became an outbreak in the White House for sure.
All right. And what about the former vice president and his wife?
Yeah, the former vice president and his wife, Karen Pence, were one of the few actually not to be tested positive. Right. They were negative for the virus.
So the president did recover from coronavirus. What did his recovery look like?
His recovery included him going to Walter Reed Medical Center. He was then put in a helicopter late Friday that he was diagnosed. This means Trump was put in with an experimental medication that helped along his treatment. Not many people have taken that experimental treatment. It was special to the president. And so, yeah, he was there for a few days before he was released, and he gradually got better. After.
All right. So while the president was hospitalized, he still retained full powers of the office. What would have had to happen in order for the president to transfer powers to the vice president?
So if Trump was, let's say, in surgery or in a health crisis, like Ronald Reagan was when he was shot, that would invoke the 25th Amendment, meaning a vice president would then have to take over and assume his position as president in the meantime.
Right, and when Ronald Reagan was shot temporarily, H.W. Bush was sworn in as president, so that could have happened with Mike Pence, but it didn't. The Centers for Disease Control and health agencies across the nation created guidelines for people to follow in order to help prevent the spread of the virus. The president's administration received backlash for not following these guidelines. What did he do?
Well, Trump has had many different campaign organizations that over the last 6 months or so, he's been having rallies that have been violating state regulations, especially here in Pennsylvania. He's come to Pittsburgh quite often in the surrounding counties with unsocially distanced rallies with many people not wearing masks, himself included. So that puts a lot of people at danger with the spread of coronavirus, because we do know that it stays in the air for a long time and it is a person-to-person virus. So it put himself and other people in danger.
Yeah, and he came to Pennsylvania a lot in the past week, and if you see the numbers, coronavirus cases have been spiking in Pennsylvania. So you also talked with students. What thoughts did they share?
Students were not surprised that Trump had coronavirus. And honestly, most of us as journalists, we aren't surprised either. We cover these things and we see Trump without masks, Trump interacting with many of his supporters on a very regular basis. And he's traveling from place to place quite often and not wearing masks. So at this point, I think people were just hoping, or not hoping, but eventually they were thinking that he was going to get it, and that's what happened. So.
Right. And I've seen some people who don't like Trump, they say they were glad. I also see people who don't like Trump who said let's be the bigger person, and obviously there was a lot of backlash from Trump supporters who's were saying, oh, they're happy that Trump got coronavirus. What do you make of that? What do you make of the whole situation where people were reacting?
Yeah. I don't know. Trump is a very polarizing president, and for him to have handled coronavirus in the way that he has, with 200,000 deaths on his administration's hands, at this point, I don't say I don't like to wish death on anyone, and I don't think anyone wants to wish death on anybody, but at that point in time, people were excited because of some sort of karmic element to the fact that he had mishandled coronavirus, and this was the result of him mishandling coronavirus.
I think it was less of people wishing death upon him and more of people, thinking, he kind of deserved what he got. He had those super spreader events with the Amy Coney Barrett thing outside.
And I mean, most of his administration had tested positive after meeting Amy Coney Barrett and having her come to the White House.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people tested positive. All right. Well, Nardos, I'm sorry. What is it again? Highlight. Sorry.
You're fine.
Nardos Haile is the co-news editor of The Globe, and thank you for speaking with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Coming up next in our segment, what does the state of the economy look like? And Globe co-news editor Jake Debkowski joins us in studio to talk about President Trump's recent nominee to the Supreme Court and how both candidates are trying to get the youth support. So stay tuned.
Coming up after the break, we'll share some more breaking poll results as they come in.
And UVU's Colton Tobias sat down with both candidates running for Pennsylvania's 18th district in the House of Representatives, the incumbent and the challenger. So don't go anywhere.
In 2015, there were over 263.3 million cars registered in the United States. Every 10 minutes, an idling car will produce 1 pound of carbon dioxide into the environment. We need to stop the release of carbon dioxide by using more public transportation. Ride a bike or carpool whenever possible. Please visit EPA.gov to learn more about how to help the environment in your everyday life.
You're watching History Happen here on Election Night 2020, but of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night. Now we're following key races across the country, and here in Pittsburgh, we're doing that as well. Congressman Mike Doyle has represented Pennsylvania's District 18 since the mid-90s. He ran unopposed in 2016 and now in 2020. He has a challenger.
Republican candidate Luke Negron spoke with Colton DeBiase about his platform and becoming a, quote, underdog.
So I also asked Congressman Doyle this same question. So, do you believe Washington is truly divided? And if you are elected to the 18th congressional district, in the state of Pennsylvania, how would you ensure the American people that politicians can truly work on both sides together, rather who is elected president?
Yeah. Okay. So I do think Washington's divided. But I think that we're fooling ourselves if we always believe that the R or the D is what causes that division. I think that, going back to the idea of elitists, I think there are elitists on both sides, right? And I think that the line between a Bush and a Clinton is really, if you look at policy, it's pretty nominal. It's almost entirely nominal. I mean, a Bush presidency and a Clinton presidency, and then everyone who trickles down, who you could categorize under them, they're just the figureheads I'm using as examples here, they're pretty similar in that they're both globalist elitists who really don't represent the people, who have gotten us into meaningless foreign wars, and these things are true of both sides. So the division isn't always between partisan. It's really between, I'd say, those who seek to be statesmen and stateswomen, which I would categorize as being part of their communities, representing their communities, staying accountable and in touch with their communities. And so statesmen and stateswomen on one side, and career politicians on the other side. Career politicians who use their power to defend their power, who forget about the people they're meant to represent, who forget about the communities who gave them that power in the first place.
Right, so what would you do to ensure the American people that if you are elected into this district, you will not forget about that?
One of the biggest things is transparent leadership. It's a drum that I've beat since I declared for this office. And that comes down to being in touch. This is something my opponent hasn't done. I go around the streets, and I ask people 2 questions. 1, do you know who your congressional rep is? I don't even tell them if it's a guy or a girl. I said, 2, can you name one thing that he or she has done for you or has tried to do? Because one congressional rep can't do it all. So at least a point of passion that, for instance, if I've been around for 4 years and I'm fighting for term limits, but I can't get it passed because the others won't support it, it's not my fault, right? I tried. So point of passion that he or she has fought for you. Nobody can answer both of those questions. After 30 years in the same district, everyone should know Mike Doyle. Everyone should know at least one thing that he's been hammering at for years, whether or not he's able to get it passed. So transparency and building that relationship with the citizenry. This comes down to something that on the left, AOC does pretty well. On the right, Dan Crenshaw does pretty well. It's so simple. They use modern technology. They get on Facebook Live or Instagram Live after a vote and they say, hey, here's a bill that's coming down the pike. Here's how it would affect you. Here's why I'm voting the way I'm voting. And they raise these issues, and people love that. If you look at Dan Crenshaw or AOC's live streams, people are in touch with them all the time. Why aren't more people like my opponent doing that? And in a bipartisan way, these are supposed to be local reps on a federal level representing us. They don't stay in touch with us because they don't care. They don't have to because they're career elitists. They've got no term limits to keep them in check. And I really think it's disgusting.
All right, Luke. Yeah, so my final question is actually about this election. So ever since 1998, Congressman Doyle has won every general election with more than 67% of the vote. And the most recent time when someone has ran against Mr. Doyle was in 2016, when he defeated Lenny McAllister with 74.68 of the vote, and McAllister got 27.32 of the vote. And this is according to the PA Department of State. Do you feel you are a underdog in this election, and how have you been trying to reach out to voters to maybe come to your side?
100%, definitely an underdog. But look, Americans love an underdog. I love an underdog. I love a good fight. I try to punch up. I don't punch down. That means I go out of my weight class. I don't bully people who are either out my weight class or below me. And Doyle's done. I mean, he's absolutely done. He just doesn't know it yet. He hasn't accepted it yet. And it's worth pointing out, though, Lenny McAllister, who lost quite severely, lost in a different district, right? This is not the same district anymore. Much of the geography has changed. Much of the numbers have changed. Actually, Congressman Doyle has never defeated an opponent in this district, as it is now, PA 18, which is a brand new district. So those are all good things to think about. And the last thing I'd say is we see a lot of what I'd call light blue, or some people would say blue dog Democrats in a working class region like Pittsburgh. These are people who are JFK Democrats, and they're not so much radical leftists. They're not so far on the left. They're really center left. And these are people I talk to every day. I mean, and we see the evidence of this where many of these unions, cop unions, Boilermakers, right? These people who have traditionally been straight party Democrat, they're endorsing Trump now. Why is that? It's because they see their own party betraying them and going too far left. So they're old school JFK guys, but they don't identify with the Democrat Party anymore. So yeah, I think we're going to get this.
Okay.
Colton, thank you. Now, we do want to bring you some updated election results. We have new Trump and Biden wins. Trump has won Oklahoma and Arkansas, while Biden has won Colorado and D.C.
So the way that the electoral votes fall now is that Oklahoma is 7 electoral votes and Arkansas is 6. That puts Trump at a grand total of 54 at the moment, whereas Biden's Colorado, has 9 and D.C. has 3. So that puts Biden at a total of 56 electoral college votes. That's a two electoral college vote difference. This is going to be a tight race, Marley.
Exactly, Taylor, you're right. Now, let's talk about those key states that we were talking about earlier. So Texas, Biden is down by about 2% right now. He's at 48.3%, while Trump is at 50.3% with 76% votes tallied. Again, that's in Texas. In Florida, Biden has 47.7%, while Trump is at 51.2%. 93% votes are tallied for Florida.
So on the other side, two more of those states that we're looking at, North Carolina, Biden is up by 0.6%, 49.7% for Joe Biden, whereas Donald Trump is sitting at a total of 49.1%, 84% of the votes tallied. In Ohio, Biden, is just ahead, 49.5%. Donald Trump is sitting at 48.4%, 64% of the votes counted. And as we're speaking, it is being counted that Donald Trump has won South Carolina with 9 electoral college votes, putting him at a total of 63. And Biden just won Delaware with 3 electoral college votes. That puts him at 59. Donald Trump has taken the 4-point lead over the former vice president.
Now let's look at those local Pennsylvania races. So an update from the 18th Congressional District, Mike Doyle and Luke Negron. Mike Doyle sits at 85.5% with 41,880 votes, while Luke Negron, has 14.5% with 7,125 votes. Another local race update from 17th Congressional District, Connor Lamb and Sean Parnell. Connor Lamb sits at 75.3% with 22,803 votes, while Sean Parnell sits at 24.7% with 7,462 votes.
Switching to a more national scale, not exactly national, but South Carolina, which Donald Trump just won the race between Lindsey Graham and Jamie Harrison. Jamie Harrison has a total of 43.44% of the votes. Lindsey Graham sitting at 55.2% with 1 million votes tallied. And then in Alabama, the incumbent, Doug Jones, is sitting at 39.66%. His opponent, Tommy Tuberville, sitting at 60.34% with 899,000.9 votes counted. The incumbent is losing in the state of Alabama. Well, Democratic incumbent Mike Doyle, as we mentioned, has been a member of Congress for 25 years.
Yes.
We switch gears to term limits, because this was something that was brought up in your debate with your opponent, Mr. Luke Negron, who has been very adamant in his campaign, about term limits. So, as somebody who has been in Congress for 25 years, would you support term limits in the Senate and the Congress? Because this was a survey conducted in 2018 by a Republican law firm called McLaughlin, and Associates. They found that 82% of Americans were in favor of a constitutional amendment that would place term limits in members of Congress, and this is according to the website The Hill. Would this be something you would support?
No. There is a term limit. I mean, this is the confusing thing that a member of Congress's term is 2 years. That's your term. You're never guaranteed more than a 2-year term. It's not up to me whether I get to serve more than one term or 2 terms. It's up to the 700,000 people in Western Pennsylvania that I represent. So every 2 years, I have to reapply for my job. I don't really know too many professions where you have to reapply for your job every 2 years, but mine's one of them. And then the people I represent have to make a decision. Is Mike Doyle someone we want to send back to Washington, D.C. to represent us, or we think maybe it's time for somebody different to do it because we're really not pleased with the way he's representing us. His votes don't reflect our beliefs or our concerns. He's not been active enough in the district. He's not really helped Pittsburgh move forward. You know, we need somebody that's going to be a little bit more dynamic or whatever reason. And every 2 years, that process takes place, not only in a general election, but in a primary election too. So voters in the Democratic Party might say, you know, Mike Doyle's not the kind of Democrat that we want representing us in Congress. We want somebody a little more liberal. We want somebody a little more moderate, or we want somebody that's going to be for this issue or that issue. And so I have had primary opponents in my last 4 or 5 elections, my last 5. And then I have general election opponents too. So every 2 years, there's 2 opportunities to say, we want somebody different. And it's not my choice. It's the choice of people in Western Pennsylvania who go to the polls and express their desire to see me continue to serve them or to pick somebody else. I think that's a pretty fair process. And I think it works well. So I don't know what some Republican law firm survey says. I'm sure, this is an issue popular with Republicans, and they've tried to make it an election issue. I don't think it carries much sway with voters because voters have the opportunity to vote for who they want. So I have a term limit. It's 2 years. Come November 3rd, my term could be up. People in Pittsburgh could say, you know what? You've been there too long. You're not really representing us the way we want to be represented. And we want a new voice in there, and they can go to the ballot box and they can do that. So I think that system works well.
Yes. But what would you have to say to maybe people who maybe criticize there not being term limits because it just seems like career politicians can just keep their power and they might not truly care about the people they serve because they know they've been in there for so long? What would you say to those people?
Well, I'd say that they're not really looking at the turnover in the Congress. When you look at the makeup of the United States Congress, people that have been there 3 terms or less are the majority now. So there's a lot of turnover taking place in the United States Congress every 2 years. You'll see a lot of it this election too. You're going to see a lot of incumbents get beat, and you're going to see a lot of new faces. We saw it in the 2018 cycle. We had 61 new members come into the Democratic caucus. So there's that's like, you know, there's a constant turnover in the Congress, and that's a healthy thing too, because you need 3 things. You need people with the institutional memory of Congress. Otherwise, staffs run the government, not elected officials. So you need people that understand how these committee structures work and how the system works. And then you need new ideas coming in every 2 years. And I think we're seeing that in our Congress. There's lots of turnover taking place. As far as this career politician thing, I think it's funny. People run and they say, I'm not a politician. And I'll never forget, there was a person on my committee started a speech that way. And I said, well, guess what, buddy? You're a politician now. You know, you might be able to have that little mantra when you were first running for office, but you're an elected official now. So you're one of us. It's the only profession I know where experience is somehow looked down on too. I mean, if we have someone that's been a cardiologist for 20 years and is really good at what he does as a cardiologist, that's the person we want to go to. Somehow, if you're a member of Congress who sits on a key committee like I do, or on a Ways and Means committee, and you've become an expert in tax policy or in telecommunications policy or energy policy, somehow that isn't valued by some people. So I just think voters ultimately have the final say so. And all this talk of career politicians or political power, I'm the son of a steel worker. I grew up in a blue-collar family in Swissvale, okay? I've been married 45 years to my wife, who also grew up in Swissvale, and we raised 4 kids. And I've lived in this district my entire life. The idea that I'm some, you know, political power person, or I come from some power family is kind of funny to me. It's talk. And I just think people judge you on your actions, not what you say, but what you do. And every 2 years, 700,000 people in this great part of the world that I love and have lived in all my life can tell me to go home anytime they want. And they do it frequently all over America. And I feel privileged that the people in Pittsburgh have chosen to send me back as many times as they did. And I continue to work very hard on their behalf. And I think they see that work ethic, and they know how much I care about them and this region. And I think that's one of the reasons on election day, I feel comfortable about what the result's going to be. But you never know till the votes are counted.
And speaking of Mike Doyle, KDKA is projecting that Mike Doyle is going to take the 18th congressional seat in Pennsylvania, but that is not yet confirmed. We will be back with a confirmation of that after the break. And speaking of after the break, Point Park's Dean of Student Affairs will be sitting down with Marley and I to discuss Point Park's COVID-19 plan, what the spring semester will look like for students, and how quarantined students were able to vote today.
2015, there were over 263.3 million cars registered in the United States. Every 10 minutes, an idling car will produce 1 pound of carbon dioxide into the environment. We need to stop the release of carbon dioxide by using more public transportation. Ride a bike or carpool whenever possible. Please visit EPA.gov to learn more about how to help the environment in your everyday life.
You're watching History Happen here on Election Night 2020, but of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night. Keith Palo is the Dean of Student Affairs here at Point Park University, and he's in studio with us right now to speak about how students voted safely this election day. Hello, Dean Palo.
Hey, Marley, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. I do want to thank you all for everything that you're doing today, and it's a fantastic show.
Thank you so much, Dean Palo. Of course, the show wouldn't be possible without you, but you are here for an interview. We'll save the praise for later. So we want to talk COVID with you. There are 3 cases on campus, 3 isolation spaces that are in use with Point Park students. So I want to ask, today is election day. Some people were planning on voting in person. How were students who were in isolation or in quarantine able to vote this election season?
Well, I think it was more about education than anything else. Even at the beginning of the fall semester, we had a lot of initiatives that were helping students to prepare for the election later on, obviously here in November. So it was educating them on, absentee ballots, how to do ballots just in case if they wanted to mail those in and so on. So we were educating our students to give them the options and again, supporting them in every way that we can, whether they were doing it from home or whether they were claiming Point Park as their address. So, and then on top of that, as you noticed, we offered free shuttles to students to the polling locations and so on to try to make it as safe as possible for our students to vote.
And Dean Palo, spring semester, it's quickly approaching, faster than I think any of us are prepared for. Is there anything about the current COVID layout of how Point Park University is handling COVID-19 safety precautions that will change for the spring semester?
Well, I think that we learn each and every week, what we've put into place. As you can imagine, since March, we had to begin to plan for this fall. I think we've done, and I want to credit students for the wonderful job that they have done in order to, I always say, use the saying, to keep this going. Wearing of masks, the simple things, social distancing. So will things change drastically in the spring semester? I don't believe so. I mean, again, but we are learning and changing things that we feel are necessary. But what we can do and what we every day do listen to our students, our faculty, our staff, any of the improvements that they believe that we should make, we're taking into consideration. But the cleaning protocols, again, promoting the wearing of masks, hand sanitizers in all locations, social distancing in and outside the classrooms, those will remain strong because that's what the CDC, our partners at UPMC, are basically telling us is that's what's going to help us to keep our numbers as low as they are.
And because Point Park has decided to carry over that high flex model and all remote learning option for students in the spring semester, what's the university's response to students who may still be struggling with the whole online learning?
Well, I think that we're seeing it in society in general, to be honest with you. And what we have done, and I'm sure you received the email like I did over these last couple of days, we know that we're going to have to support our students in many ways. And that it could include, our mental health. We've seen in society that isolation and things along those lines over a period of months is and can take its toll. So what we're trying to do is is ratchet up our counseling services area and our counseling center, our health center, of course. We basically over doubled our personnel there to try to support our students through these tough times. But as far as the classroom and in the situation, again, I think our students have done a wonderful job in adjusting to really the three ways that you can attend classes, obviously in person or the high flex model or the remote learning. But again, having two children that are teenagers and that are going through this in the high schools and middle schools, it's kind of the same kind of idea. The students are struggling. Even the best students we are seeing are struggling through this new mode. And I know that our faculty and our staff, our Center for Student Success, all of those various areas, including all my areas of student affairs, are doing everything that we can to support our students. So what I said even for the last question is reach out. Let us know what you need. Help us to offer the resources that we can to help you be as successful as possible.
And of course, you spoke of the counseling center, and even from today, we got an email in our Point Park emails today about screenings that the counseling center is having to deal with election stress. So, you know, not even efforts from COVID, but for election, you guys are doing that as well, obviously.
We are, and I just mentioned in the hallway before the interview is that we learned a lot in 2016. I'll be honest, I was caught off guard in the sense that we really didn't know in 2016 what the reaction would be post-election. We found out in a big way in a sense that there were a lot of students, a lot of people in general, that had various reactions, but some of it was very stressful for students, some traumatic. You could use that word in a sense of the results of that election. And even though we did have counseling services, we needed to ratchet those up in a sense to make sure that we could accommodate our students. This time around, I think we're ahead of the curve. We're prepared for whatever the results are and helping to support our students through this time.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dean Palo. It's a pleasure having you, and thank you for all the effort that you put into allowing this show to happen. We really appreciate everything that you do for us. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure, and again, I appreciate everything that you all do, the things you do for our students, and of course, bringing the quality programming that you do each and every day. So thanks so much.
Our partners over at WPPJ Radio are following the races, sharing national statistics, and breaking down topics with editors from the Point Park Globe. Joining them now is Jake Debkowski, co-news editor of the Globe, to learn more about President Trump's recent Supreme Court nominee and how the two candidates hope to get support from younger voters.
Welcome back to WPPJ's live election night coverage, streaming on WPPJradio.com and YouView Television. The state of the economy has become a major point of contention in this election. The economy has plummeted due to the coronavirus pandemic, but allow me to backtrack to the origin of the effect the economy has had on this election. First off, I want to talk about how the economy has affected the past few elections. The perceived state of the economy has proven to be have a huge correlation with both the approval rating of an incumbent president and the electability of the party of the sitting president. Let's look at the George W. Bush administration, for example. Bush had both the highest and lowest approval rating in American history during his presidency. According to Gallup, Bush started off with an approval rating of 57% near the beginning of his presidency, when we were still seeing net positive gross domestic product. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, due to the dot-com boom, and ended off with a 34% approval rating amidst the housing crisis. Barack Obama, in turn, received a decisive 365 to 103 electoral victory. Under Obama, we saw, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, net positive GDP starting quarter 3 of 2009. The economy was doing well, and Obama won again in 2012. In 2016, the economy was still on the incline. The Bureau of Economic Analysis shows that we saw net positive growth from quarter 1 to quarter 3. This is a definite reason why Hillary Clinton was shown by 538 to have a 70% chance at winning. The economy was doing well under Obama, so naturally a lot of people were willing to stick with the Democratic candidate. What won Trump the election, however, was his concentration on Rust Belt states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. According to the Kentucky Center for Statistics, were economically vulnerable due to a severe drop in manufacturing jobs under Obama.
This gave Trump a decisive electoral college victory. So how is the economy going to affect the election this time around? The Bureau of Economic Analysis reported net positive GDP all throughout Trump's presidency until 2020, where it dropped exponentially due to the pandemic. Trump is essentially campaigning on hoping people trust him to bring the economy back to the way it was pre-COVID, which was still rising from the economy following 2008. Trump is making an attempt to obfuscate himself from the state of our economy and paint the pandemic as beyond his control. After COVID hit, the Morning Consult showed that the gap started to close in on voters' trust for Trump on the economy, having favorability towards Biden. Economic signs point to a Biden win, but who knows? It's 2020. Anything could happen. And Alexis Bonifate is our poll checker for the evening, and we'll be following the results all night long. What results are we seeing across the country?
Yeah, Carlo. So we have several more states that we can call. USA Today, the Associated Press, and the New York Times have called victory for Joe Biden in New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Illinois. New York is a huge victory for Joe Biden because it carries 29 electoral votes, mainly because of the population of New York City. This will greatly help him on his race to 270 electoral votes. Donald Trump can declare victory in Kansas, Nebraska, Mississippi, Tennessee, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Indiana. These states overall carry less electoral votes, but that's still beneficial to our sitting president. Right now, we do need to focus on our swing states, though. Politico is currently reporting that Trump has a 52% to 47% lead in Ohio, with approximately 80% of the votes reported there. Politico is also reporting that Joe Biden has a lead in Iowa, which is home of the first primary. Biden is ahead right now with 62.1% of the votes. Only 40% of those votes have been counted so far, so we will continue to focus on Iowa into the night. In Texas, which unexpectedly has become a swing state, the New York Times is now reporting Donald Trump has a slight lead with 51%. That state carries the second highest number of electoral college votes, so we will look forward to those results. But here in Pennsylvania, Joe Biden, our native son, has fallen into quite a predicament. Donald Trump is currently in the lead with 52%, according to the Associated Press, but only 26% of those votes have been recorded. The polls have been closed for about 2.5 hours now, so it's kind of surprising that a small amount of these votes have been counted, but that could be due to mail-in ballots only being counted this morning. For local House elections in District 17, Connor Lamb right now has a very strong lead with 59.6% against his Republican opponent, Sean Parnell. And the Associated Press has called victory for Democrat incumbent Mike Doyle, who has won with 86% of the vote. I think the whole nation right now is on the edge of their seats, trying to look forward to see if Joe Biden's final campaigning in Pennsylvania will eventually pay off in the end.
All right. Thank you very much, Alexis. Jake Dabkowski is the co-news editor of The Globe and joins us in studio to talk about newly appointed Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett and the battle between the two campaigns. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And first question I have for you is President Trump nominated Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, and she has since been confirmed by the Senate. So what is Barrett's background?
Barrett has experience in constitutional law. She was appointed to let me look at what circuit it was. She was serving on the 7th Circuit for the Court of Appeals. She was appointed by President Trump to that position in November of 2017. 11 months later, only 11 months later, she was added to the administration's short list of candidates for potential Supreme Court vacancies. So that was when they were prepping, not necessarily for Ginsburg, but for any number of justices. If a justice just decided to retire, but ultimately he picked Coney Barrett. I believe he picked Coney Barrett to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat because she's a woman. I think that I do not think politically Trump could have replaced. There was on that short list, I know, for example, Senator Ted Cruz was on that list. He did say he wouldn't accept the nomination, but I don't think that Trump would have been able to so swiftly appoint someone to the court if they weren't someone of Coney Barrett's background.
Do you think that Democrats were too... do you think Democrats kind of obfuscated and kind of backed away because Amy Coney Barrett was a woman?
I don't want to say that. I think that if Ted Cruz were the nominee, I think that they would have had a much easier time fighting that. I think that Coney Barrett, from an optics perspective, to you're maybe more conservative Democrat or you're maybe never Trump Republican, Coney Barrett is a good Supreme Court pick in their eyes. You know, to a lot of people on this campus, to a lot of leftists, to a lot of liberal voices, Amy Coney Barrett is a horrible pick. You know, most people would view her as having bad politics. Without getting too far into opinion territory, I do believe that her pick. So we're looking at the races tonight, right? And NBC News just reported that Democrats will likely retain control of the House, which is not unexpected. No one really knows how the Senate's going to go. And the presidency, we might not have results tonight. No one knows. For the Republican Party, maybe not for Donald Trump, but for Mitch McConnell, for Marco Rubio, for the donors, for, you know, the average Joe Schmo like Republican, getting that Supreme Court vacancy filled was way more important than winning the election.
Right.
They didn't really care about optics because they had the Senate power and they had the ability to fill that seat.
Right. Right. Totally. Makes sense. So why is it important that she's now a justice, and why did the president receive backlash for nominating her? I guess you kind of touched on.
Well, another thing, the bigger thing about the backlash was that people were already voting. It was so close to the election. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dying wish was that whoever won the next election would fill her seat. Trump, I'm not going to get into if I think he respected that wish, but you know, he didn't. But I think that for Trump, filling this seat really is important to this election, because we're looking at, Trump says he has lawyers prepared to challenge mail-in ballots. He has lawyers prepared to challenge certain calls. Amy Coney Barrett, part of her background you asked about, she worked on a sidebar for the Bush 2000 lawsuit.
I didn't know that.
Very small, you know, but she was involved, and had she not been involved in that counsel, Bush likely would not have won his challenge. And I think that kind of tells us how she would vote in a hypothetical situation if a case involving this election goes to the Supreme Court. And I think that's part of the reason why Democrats were more opposed to her. A lot of people I talked to on campus were afraid of that happening.
So the thing with Mitch McConnell and the Republicans is their argument is it's in Trump's constitutional right. The Republicans have the Senate, and the Republicans also had the Senate under Obama. So
and they previously blocked Merrick Garland. Right. And, for example, Pat Toomey, you know, he opposed Garland's nomination, but he rushed to confirm Coney Barrett. This is one of the fastest Supreme Court confirmations in history. In my opinion, one of the most partisan, you know, with the vote. And I think that ultimately, like I said, getting that Supreme Court seat was more important to them than any race tonight, you know.
And you mentioned Pat Toomey. What about Bob Casey? What's he have to say?
Yeah, Bob Casey, being a Democrat, he opposed her confirmation, and he definitely took a more logistical. He basically was using their words against them. He said, "You set this precedent. We're going to follow this precedent."
All right. You also wrote a piece revealing the showdown between the two candidates. Pennsylvania is a major key state in this election. Both President Trump and Vice President Biden made several stops to the state throughout the campaign. Biden wrapping up right here in Pittsburgh's North Shore just last night.
Yes.
So how is the Biden campaign trying to get the youth vote?
Well, for example, he had Lady Gaga with him at his rally last night. I think that definitely, for example, he was walking through Oakland with Lady Gaga, just trying to like kind of surprise Oakland kids, say hi on the street. Me personally, you know, if I'm an Oakland voter, and maybe this only turns out 10, 15 people, but if I'm an Oakland voter and I'm not sure if I really have time to vote, if I bump into Joe Biden and Lady Gaga, I'm waiting in line at that polling place for 7 hours tomorrow, you know. So I think that the Biden has definitely, he's also has student debt programs to wipe away certain student debt. That's part of his COVID response plan, actually, thinks it'll help the economy. And I think that that's a big part of his pitch to students, is that he ultimately is pitching like he does care about them. Now, he's not maybe as far to the left on the issues as Bernie Sanders is. He's not as far on the left as the issues as Bernie Sanders is. And that was more college students supported him if you look at the demographics. Yeah. And, you know, we covered the primary last semester. But I still think that Biden focused on making a lot of concessions to that side of the aisle and focused on appealing to college, I think that a lot of people our age just don't like President Trump. And I think ultimately, pretty much everyone I talked to said they were voting for who they perceived as a lesser of two evils candidate.
Right.
I spoke with Trump supporters too on campus, and that might surprise some of you, but there are Trump supporters on campus. And one of the people I spoke to said, I don't really support him, but I just don't want to see Joe Biden be president,
Yeah. And it's the same the other way around.
Yeah,
right?
and I think that what it comes down to is I don't know if Biden can pull off a win tonight, and I don't think we'll have results tonight, but I don't think that Biden can pull off a win running on disliking Trump. On the flip side, I think that Trump is such a polarizing figure that people want to change the channel, I think ultimately. And I think that is something that you'll see in the results in Biden's favor.
All right. Well, this is a great conversation. Thank you, but we have to wrap it up.
Thank you for having me.
And again, Jake Debkowski is the co-news editor of The Globe.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking with us very much. In our next segment, Nardos... I'm sorry, what is it again? Nardos joins us back in the studio to share Point Park's response to Black Lives Matter, race and ethnic inequality. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at WPPJ Radio and Instagram at WPPJ. 6:70 a.m. We'll be right back.
All right, WPPJ, thank you for that insight. When we come back, we'll bring you the latest poll results from around the country and right here at home.
And UVU's Jess Dillon spoke with members of the Pittsburgh community on the topic of diversity and making your voice heard. Stay tuned.
In 2015, there were over 263.3 million cars registered in the United States. Every 10 minutes, an idling car will produce 1 pound of carbon dioxide into the environment. We need to stop the release of carbon dioxide by using more public transportation. Ride a bike or carpool whenever possible. Please visit EPA.gov to learn more about how to help the environment in your everyday life.
You're watching History Happen here on Election Night 2020, but of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night. All right, we have some breaking results that we want to share with you. Trump has just won Missouri. upping the electoral votes to 73 that Trump has won so far. And Biden has won Illinois, and that total number of electoral votes that Biden now has is 79.
And looking at these swing states that we've been talking about, Texas not even being a swing state, Trump is now up 51.3% to Biden's 47.3%, 81% of the votes tallied. In Florida, we're seeing Biden at 47.7% with Donald Trump sitting at 51.2%, 94% of those votes counted. North Carolina, we see a closer race. Donald Trump is up 49.8% to Biden's 49%. Even 89% of the votes tallied. And in Ohio, a race that we are closely following, we see Donald Trump sitting at 51.8% and Joe Biden at 43.8% with 74% of those votes tallied. And in those congressional seats, we see South Carolina and Alabama with their polls closed, joining Kentucky to have those closed polls on these Senate races that we're watching.
Yes, so we're starting to see, polls closing, just final decisions being made. So, the clock is ticking. But for Texas, I know we were keeping a main eye on that in the last poll check, but it's still that close race, just roughly 3 points apart.
Something we're not used to seeing from Texas, and we keep repeating that because we want you guys to know that this is an unprecedented thing that's going on within Texas. Seeing a race this close, it would be like seeing Mitch McConnell lose Kentucky or seeing Tennessee go blue. This is the same impact that this is going to have on the country, and to see this is incredible in either sense.
Exactly.
So for years, protests in the United States have been heard through the streets over a handful of topics. We've got gender equality, women's rights, raising the minimum wage. This year, while all of these issues still remain in the spotlight, protests and marches have been more focused on Black Lives Matter and LGBT rights.
UVU's Jess Dillon sat down with organizers of the weekly transgender rights protests to talk about how this election affects their fight and the fight for diversity.
Tensions are high this election season. Many marginalized communities have been taking to the streets all summer to protest for their rights. Still, many members of these vulnerable groups do not feel as though they are being represented in local politics.
I don't really see myself reflected on the ballot. I mean, for some of the candidates, I see like my skin color reflected, them seeing what they want to do for for Black people and other minorities, but I don't know if they're exactly going to do anything for, the LGBT community.
No, I don't see myself reflected.
Okay.
I voted for a cis white male, so it's, and I'm a gay, non-binary Latinx. We still have a very long way to go until I'm sure we get to, a point where, in general, a lot of people, or at least minorities, feel or see themselves reflected at such a high presidential level, so it's everyone says it's definitely like voting for a lesser evil. We just want Trump out of office, honestly, at this point. So
I think I agree with them. I feel like I am just settling for Biden. I really do wish there was, a better candidate on the ballot that I could really see myself in.
No, I've been paying attention to local for a long time now, just to watch what's happening and how things happen, and I don't feel like I settled.
I think the way we've been doing things, we should kind of honestly stop and take a look at it and kind of restructure the way things have been run, because it's honestly to benefit a certain type of person, and we need to take into account that the human race is made up more than that type of person.
This election means a lot to me, and this election can quite literally determine my survival, and my friend's survival, my family's survival. I want to see less cops, less police brutality.
Well, there's a lot of hoping for sure, but if we're going to see those changes, I'm not entirely positive that's going to happen. There's candidates who say they're going to, that kind of reflect what those beliefs, but again, acting on it and actually doing it is a whole different story. So,
voter suppression is real. I actually did, like I was telling you, a few voter registration drives over here on the south side, up in the hilltop communities, and the disenfranchisement of people of color, the way they feel, you know what I mean? Like the voter suppression side, like the amount of felons that I personally know that believe they couldn't vote for whatever reason, to realize that they can vote, you know? The empowerment that I saw in their eyes in that moment, you know? But the disenfranchisement and voter education too, you know? So that's my next move, voter education.
Black Lives Matter, Black Trans Lives Matters.
Thanks, Jess. After the break, we'll bring you updated election results and with an interview from Point Park's Deputy Chief of Police. We'll be right back.
In 2015, there were over 263.3 million cars registered in the United States. Every 10 minutes, an idling car will produce 1 pound of carbon dioxide into the environment. We need to stop the release of carbon dioxide by using more public transportation. Ride a bike or carpool whenever possible. Please visit EPA.gov to learn more about how to help the environment in your everyday life.
You're watching History Happen here on Election Night 2020, but of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night.
Welcome back. We have some breaking results that we want to share with you right now.
Yeah, so Trump has just won Utah, bringing his electoral vote count to 79. And as of right now, Trump's electoral votes and Biden's electoral votes are tied, both at 79.
And as we said in the last breaking poll report, the races in South Carolina and Alabama, the polls are closed, and we want to update you on those numbers. In South Carolina for the Senate seat, Jamie Harrison versus Lindsey Graham. Jamie Harrison is sitting at 43.46%. Lindsey Graham with 55.77% of those votes, with 1.4 votes counted. And then heading over to Alabama, Doug Jones, the incumbent, is sitting at 37.04% of the votes. His opponent, Tommy Tuberville, sitting at 63.28 with 1.6 million votes counted. It looks like that's going to be a seat that is going to flip here, and we're seeing that across the country as we're on the air. Multiple Senate seats that are starting to flip. Another one we're keeping an eye out for. Susan Collins, we will get you those results as those polls begin to close. And protesters have been chanting here in Pittsburgh and across the country for racial equality and justice.
Point Park University's Deputy Chief of Police, Nicholas Black, joins us live in studio right now to share what training the Point Park Police Department went through and how other departments across the nation can enforce the law and uphold justice. Officer Black, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. I'm glad to be here.
So I want to touch real quick. We see around the city, around multiple cities around the country even, that businesses are starting to board up in preparation for the reactions that are happening or that are going to happen from this election. We see it a block away at the First National Bank. Those windows are all boarded up. We are located right in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh. So how do you keep us safe? Or what training, I should say, has your department gone through in order to keep Point Park students safe in these unprecedented times?
One thing with the police department, we've always remained proactive. All the officers are Act 120 certified, so same police officers that everybody have in their boroughs or hometowns. With the cameras we have on campus, we have over 550 plus cameras, plus the radio system we operate with the City of Pittsburgh Sheriff's Port Authority. So being downtown, we didn't take a proactive approach to any encounters that we could face. All the officers are trained. We do use of force often. We do OC, taser, firearms. We're an accredited police department, so we always have had our policies held to a higher standard, and our daily activities uphold and fall in sync with what our policies impose.
Thank you. And the Black Lives Matter movement has trended across the nation with many protests advocating for justice of unarmed black men and women who have died at the hands of police. So, Officer Black, how does your police department respond to this?
Well, I think every situation that takes place, there's an officer involved shooting, whether it's a white male, a black male, male, female. I don't think it's ever gender-based, race-based. I think every incident that comes to play has a specific meaning or purpose. If you was to take, this is my view, you take social media out of everything, you take the news out of everything, and you just stick to the facts of the case, what the officer chose to do, why the actor or actors chose to do what they did. And I think everything comes out to play. Use of force sometimes is justified, sometimes it could be an unfortunate event. But with that situation, the courts, it'll play out with the courts.
And talking specifically about police reform policies, what steps have you and your fellow officers taken to prevent these violent arrests from happening?
What we do is what we've always done. We've never changed anything because of what's going on. We've always had lots of policies, lots of training. Anything that's going on now is nothing new to a police department. It's just how are they preparing for the after effects that are taking place. A lot of it's policy based. What policies are imposed with that department? Like I said, we're an accredited police department, and being accredited means we have over 100 plus policies that we have to follow and uphold with our police department. And that's what we do with our training, with our daily patrols, with our operations from day to day.
So, as we discussed in our breaking poll report a few minutes ago, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are currently tied with 79 electoral college votes each. One of the main stances from Biden and the Democratic Party in this election, I should say, is defunding the police. So if Biden wins, they're tied right now, and this is put into practice, How would that affect our campus department?
That I don't know. Like I said, we were employed through Point Park University in 2011. Actually, June 7th, 2011, they hired a police department. So we were hired. We hired officers. We're here. I guess that's something that the university would have to correlate with. But as long as they say we want the police department here, then we're here.
And, with that defunding the police department, with that, there's the potential of not having enough people on staff. Maybe, a handful have to be let go. If that was the case, if your police department was shrunken down, what would that propose?
That is a situation that the university would have to think about thoroughly, and that's a decision that they would have to make. Like I said, everyone's entitled to their own opinion with defunding the police. I think it gained popularity through your social media platforms. Me personally, I think it's ludicrous. I think a lot of times where actions can be spoken about, but until they're actually imposed, you won't see the repercussion after the fact. And I think you could probably write pros and cons from that and have a lot more cons than you would pros. So that's a decision that, higher officials above me with the university could make, and then we would just go from there.
All right, thank you so much, Officer Black. I know that myself, and can't speak for everyone in the room, but I'm going to feel a little bit safer walking home tonight. It seems pretty calm on the streets now, but a lot can happen within the next hour. Thank you, Officer Black.
Absolutely, no problem. Thank you, guys.
Well, our friends at WPPJ Radio have been speaking with editors of the Point Park Globe. Joining them once again is co-news editor Nardos Haile to talk about Black Lives Matter, race, and ethnic inequality.
All right. Welcome back to WPPJ's live election night coverage, streaming on WPPJradio.com and YouView Television. The issue of civil rights and racial justice has had a huge impact on American politics. Following the killing of George Floyd, mass Black Lives Matter protests all across the country have risen, and I would like to go over what exactly BLM's message is, what their opposition has to say, and how it's currently affecting this election. The BLM movement tackles a wide array of topics, all that can be found on m4bl.org. There's a call to action on reallocating police funds to civil services, framed as, quote, defund the police, to reallocate tax dollars to help communities of color, ending mass incarceration, legalizing marijuana, abolishing for-profit prisons, and much more. These are the big ideas that have been made mainstream due to the mass protests. Although the support for Black Lives Matter increased following the George Floyd killing, so did the opposition. In fact, the opposition to the movement increased more than the support, according to Civics polling. It turns out the majority of people who were on the fence before the mass protests switched over to opposing the movement. So what does the opposition to BLM have to say? Conservative outlets, like Fox News, have condemned the movement for the riots that occurred during the protests. There were instances, especially in the earlier protests directly following George Floyd's death, where the protests escalated to rioting, looting, and even some arson. Also, they have serious contentions with the demonization of police officers, hence the counter-protest movement Blue Lives Matter. President Trump has picked up on the anti-BLM rhetoric, but Biden hasn't fully endorsed the Black Lives Matter agenda. Well, he has endorsed giving more training to police officers and other various social changes. His platform on JoeBiden.com does not include, for instance, legalizing marijuana, federally funding schools, ending mass incarceration, or abolishing for-profit prisons. Now, when it comes to voters, according to a Fox News poll, 47% say they trust Biden on criminal justice and policing, while 42% say they support Trump. It seems that Biden's over 50% favorability in the national polls, according to 538, reflects more of an anti-Trump sentiment than a pro-Biden one. No matter who wins this election, the Black Lives Matter movement will persist and is likely to also be critical of a potential Biden administration. We are following all of the election results here at WPPJ, and we'll check in with our poll watcher, Alexis Bonifate. Alexis, it's almost 3 hours after polls closed here in Pennsylvania. Can we call any races yet?
We can call races, but not Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is currently only reporting at 41% of the votes recorded. Donald Trump does continue to lead. He has approximately 56% of the vote right now, but that may be due to the fact that many of the Democrat-led counties have not reported many of their votes. Allegheny County has only reported about 17%. Philadelphia County, as well as surrounding counties, have reported about 22% of their ballots. These are Democratic strongholds, so the night is still very young for votes in Pennsylvania. We can call races in South Carolina, Missouri, and Alabama. The Associated Press and ABC have reported that Donald Trump can claim victory in those states. Right now, we do have to look at a few battleground states, though. In Michigan, CNN is reporting that Trump has a lead right now. He has approximately 55% of the vote compared to Joe Biden's 44%. For the Biden camp, they do have some hope in Minnesota, though. Biden leads right now with 61%. Minnesota actually has the longest continuous Democratic streak of any state in the nation. They last voted for a Republican candidate in 1972 with Richard Nixon. The New York Times is reporting that Joe Biden has a good lead in Arizona with about 75% of the votes reported there. He currently has over 53% of the vote. He also still maintains a good lead in Iowa with 48% of the votes counted there. North Carolina is definitely too close to call at this point. CNN and the New York Times have reported that they have 93 to 95% of their votes recorded. Trump does have the slight edge right now where he's holding about 50%. It's all because of that third-party candidate that Joe Biden, it's not equal 50-50. We also do have a few high-profile legislative districts that we can call. Lindsey Graham has won re-election in Alabama for the Senate. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has won the 14th district in New York for the House races. And former presidential candidate Cory Booker has won re-election in New Jersey for the Senate. The night is continuing here. We are still waiting on many of the polls on the West Coast to close, so honestly, we don't know what may happen at this point.
All right, so overall, who's winning the electorate right as of now?
Currently, it has been reported that Joe Biden has more electoral college votes. The New York Times, which they may be a little proactive about this right now, they're reporting that he has 209 electoral votes. They have also they're making predictions that he will win Washington, Oregon, and California, which is not surprising at all. They're showing that Donald Trump has 112 electoral votes, but that he is leading in the popular vote. So we could see a little bit of a repeat of 2016, but maybe on the opposite end of the aisle.
Wow. That would be very interesting. Well, thanks, Alexis. And Nardos Haile, got that right this time, is the co-news editor of The Globe and is back in studio to break down the Black Lives Matter movement and racial and ethnic inequality. Thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me.
So you spoke with Point Park Deputy Chief of Police, Nicholas Black, about police brutality and reform. What did you learn about Point Park's police force?
So first of all, I want to say that Amanda Andrews, our editor-elect, had this interview. It wasn't me, so I'm going to speak on behalf of her. Nicholas Black is the deputy chief of Point Park's police department, and he spoke to Amanda about the race relations between students and cops on campus. Basically, what was said was deputy chief's opinion that most of the things that have been happening in our country and in Pittsburgh have been taken out of context on social media, and that it puts officers in a bad light. So that is his opinion, and he has casted some doubt on protesters and their motivations for the movement as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So there have been protests here in Pittsburgh and across the nation. You looked at data on peaceful protests, so what did you find?
Yeah, actually, overwhelmingly, about like 93% of protests that happened from May all the way up until August were peaceful. So that kind of goes against the grain of what has been said, in that most protests have been violent and have resulted in looting and arson, which is not the case. Most demonstrations have been fairly peaceful, and it's been a narrative kind of constructed by media. There's been a lot of media bias in when reporting on protesters at these demonstrations. And so for that reason, there has been a skewed kind of view of what these demonstrations have looked like over the past 6 months.
Right. And so you mentioned, Nicholas Black views that these protests are kind of painting officers in a bad light.
Of course, yeah.
What did you or any other students have to say to that?
Well, in my opinion, I would say that what's been documented has been very prevalent in our policing systems. It's not something that is out of the ordinary with our policing systems and the way they treat Black and brown people. So I would say in my experience that Black and brown people have always faced higher forms of policing and higher rates of policing and higher rates of incarceration. So for that matter, I can't say that cops are being wrongfully painted in a negative stereotype or a negative viewpoint when the statistics say that Black and brown people are heavily policed in their communities. So I would have to disagree on that.
All right. And some protests have called to defund the police. So what, in your view, does that mean?
Well, defunding the police means that we take, annually in budgets, police get a lot of money. Right. It ends up being totaling into millions of dollars. And what progressives and left-leaning activists and representatives have said is that they want to defund the police. And that means we take away and allocate funds that typically are given to police, and we allocate them to social services that are going to really help our communities and kind of bring down the rates of unjust crime, like unjust basically arrests, like small misdemeanor arrests of like drug charges and stuff like that. So it would ultimately help a community grow instead of over policing a community that is predominantly Black or brown.
Right. Okay. And so here in Point Park, how do you see the relations between Point Park police and students on campus? Because I read in the article that Nicholas Black feels that the tensions are rising between the students and the police here on campus. What do you make of that?
Well, I wouldn't say that the police and students have a bad relationship on campus. I feel like Point Park police aren't as, I don't know what the right phrasing is for this, but Point Park police aren't Pittsburgh police in a way.
Right.
They are just patrolling our campus. They don't really arrest people for violent crimes like most police officers do, or patrolling the way regular police officers do, like Pittsburgh police officers do. So I feel like there's a difference in the way a city police officer operates and the way Point Park operates in a way. So I would have to say the relationship, from what I've seen, has been all right. Like, I haven't seen any sort of like profiling or wrongful arrests on any occasion. But I would say like anyone's perception of cops have, like, the perception of police and cops have definitely changed over the last few years as we see more videotapes of people getting wrongfully arrested and brutalized in front of a video camera by multiple police officers. So things have definitely changed, and I feel like that relationship has changed for a lot of police departments.
Understood. And you also, maybe you didn't speak with, was this your friend who spoke with Vice President of Human Resources,
yes.
Lisa Stefanko? Okay. So she spoke with her about a university-wide steering committee for inclusion and a future director of equity and inclusion position. What does the committee hope to accomplish here on campus?
Well, I think that this committee actually came to fruition after the cancellation of Adding Machine and Parade. So these were different productions that had a lot of racial slurs and made a lot of the COPA students here uncomfortable with the material. So I think that what they're trying to accomplish with these new groups and steering committees for inclusion is to try to eliminate like the microaggressions that most students of color face on campus. So this would kind of create a place that people can go to these committees and give their complaints and help fix the sort of systemic problems at our school, and the microaggressions, like I said, and the small bits of racism that people face on campus every day.
Right. And I believe I read in the article that Point Park was rated 17th in the country when it comes to racial equity and the way students of color are treated. Do you think there are still definite issues that need to be fixed?
Of course. I mean, no institution is perfect. And altogether, institutions are typically built on racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and on the backs of minorities. So, of course, these institutions still need to check themselves and make sure that they are providing a safe place for their students of color to come here. I mean, Point Park prides itself on diversity and inclusion. So it only makes sense to me that they take the steps necessary to make students comfortable and make sure that they aren't being targeted by any professor or any other students or made to feel uncomfortable while they're trying to learn.
Right. There's always room for improvement.
Exactly, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me.
And in our final segment of the evening, we'll give our last poll check of the evening, and the Globe's editor-elect joins us to talk about how politics may be changing the Jewish community in Pittsburgh. Thank you for listening and watching. We'll be back soon.
And coming up, we'll bring you the latest poll results as they come in.
And our friends at WPPJ will bring you their final segments of the night. Don't go anywhere. Watching history happen here on Election Night 2020. But of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night. All right, we have some breaking results that we want to share with you, and we have our correspondent Nick Konopka in studio with us to talk about that as well.
So lots of stuff happening. Let's just get right down to it. We've got more victories in states for each of the candidates. Starting on the Republican side, Donald Trump has just won West Virginia, Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. This puts his electoral vote total up to 110.
And we also have an update from the Alabama Senate race against Doug Jones and Tommy Tuberville. Doug Jones is sitting at 36.97%, and Tommy Tuberville is at 63.03%, 1.8 million votes as of right now, and that's according to the Associated Press.
And going back a little bit in Biden's wins since we last updated you on the polls, he just won California, a given state, but still adds a lot to his electoral college votes. He also won Oregon, Washington, and New Jersey. This brings his total by our count up to 167. Marley, you mentioned the Senate races, and Nick Konopka has been following those Senate races. So, Nick, what have you been seeing?
Yeah, so sticking to the West, as you were talking about California, Arizona and Colorado, those are looking very good for the Democrats in the Senate. Colorado, it's a safe state for Democrats normally with the presidency, but just recently, former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper is up 12 points against incumbent Republican Cory Gardner. And then going to Arizona, you have Mark Kelly, former astronaut, who is leading in the polls with about 73% reporting. He's up about 11 points against the Senator Martha McSally. And Martha McSally was appointed to that seat, and previously she ran against Kyrsten Sinema back in 2018, which the seat was also lost by McSally. So in this case, we might have a situation where Martha McSally lost both seats in the Arizona Senate races.
All races that we're going to want to follow as the night continues and as the week continues. We still don't know whether we're going to know a winner by the end of the night or not. But switching gears, you asked and we're answering. It's time to look at what you've been sending us all night using hashtag PointParkVotes on social media.
Yeah, there's still time to send in your questions, stories, and everything else in between. So make sure to head to social media to send us what you want to hear. So let's get started.
So our question comes from Rihanna, and she asks, how do you deal with election anxiety? That's something we talked about with Dean Palo when he was on, about the counseling center offering screenings. It's a lot.
It's definitely a lot of stress. I know that a lot of us want to keep up to date on everything happening in politics and watching the news a lot, which, you know, we totally do.
We're right here.
Yes. But, you know, you have to split that up into time blocks, not to strain your mind, strain your eyes. So personally, what I do is I'll research or, you know, watch the news and keep up to date for 10 to 15 minutes at a time. And then I'll take a break. I'll step back and do something that really puts my mind at ease, you know, whether it's watching a YouTube video or taking, you know, a bubble bath or a shower, just, you know, something to really decompress, because Taylor, as you and I were talking about, the mind can get chaotic with just so many things running around.
Yeah, absolutely. And as college students, this is our first time being able to vote in a presidential election. So we are as invested in this as we have ever been. And there's so much on the line with this election that it is, no matter who comes out on top, but it's just so easy to get fully engrossed with everything that's happening on social media, in the news, and anything. So yeah, Marley, like you said, it's just so important to take that time for yourself, just unplug from everything. I like to, you know, take an Epsom salt bath and maybe do a face mask or something, throw on a musical, preferably Hamilton, so I can just scream sing.
That sounds so nice. Oh my gosh, I'm just thinking about what I'm going to do after tonight.
I'm going to watch Hamilton.
And exactly. So, Rihanna, I hope we answered your question. You know, just really take time for yourself. Of course, you know, keep up with, you know, following the research that all goes into this presidential debate, you know, if you're wanting to do that, but don't strain your mind, take those breaks.
So, Nick, we kept you on. We got a question for you because we were talking in the break.
Of course, yeah.
You know, a little while ago, the Electoral College votes were tied between both of the candidates. And it is very possible, with the way that these swing states could swing, that there could be a tie in the Electoral College vote. You mentioned 269 to 269.
Yes.
You listen to a lot of NPR podcasts, as you said. What happens when that happens?
Well, is the way the states are swinging. You know, you see Florida, Trump has a pretty, not a significant lead, but a tight lead there. So if Trump wins Florida and Biden wins Arizona, which he has a pretty good lead in, that leaves Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which were the three battleground states that Trump flipped in 2016. So there's a scenario in which Pennsylvania goes red, but Biden maintains Wisconsin and Michigan, and that would lead us to a 269-269 tie. And in that situation, the vote for the president would go to the House of Representatives, and they would go to pick the president, which currently the Democrats do hold a majority in the House. However, it is not a representative by representative vote. It is by state delegation. And currently in the House, the Republicans hold more state delegations, so the Republicans control more states in the House, meaning that most likely if it were to be a tie, Donald Trump would still win the election.
A very interesting situation, one that we may not see again in our lifetime. And we're only, what, 21, 22, 18 plus years old?
Exactly, yeah. This trend of this is being counted as one of the most historical elections ever. Just, points, just like Nick made, just keeps adding to that.
It's like a
really
new
proving
thing
it.
every single day
Exactly.
with this election. And as we've said in our little promos, we are watching history happen, truly. It's kind of insane.
It's crazy. And I'm just so glad that, us college kids get to be a part of this now.
Yeah, it's nice to be voting.
Yes.
Things are starting to wrap up over at WPPJ. Amanda Andrews, editor-elect of The Globe, reported on the changing political climate of Pittsburgh's Jewish community. Let's check in with them over at the podcast studio.
Welcome back to WPPJ's live election night coverage, streaming on WPPJradio.com and YouView Television. And now, our final check of election results for the evening. Alexis, how's it looking?
We currently have 16 states that are still too close to call. The states that we can call right now is the New York Times and Associated Press are declaring victory in New Hampshire for Joe Biden. He will pick up 4 electoral votes with that one. Joe Biden will also pick up 3 electoral votes with his 92.6% win in Washington, D.C. The Associated Press and New York Times is reporting that California, Oregon, and Washington have been called as victories for Joe Biden, even right now as the polls are just closing. So that will give him an additional 74% electoral college votes. Most of the states where Trump is leading right now continue to be highly contested. That includes states such as Pennsylvania, Georgia, Florida, Texas, and North Carolina. So those are definitely ones you're going to want to have to look at and stay tuned to later in the evening. Politico does have President Trump leading in Ohio with 92% of the votes reported, so that one could be called very soon. Going back to Pennsylvania, we did receive notice that Governor Tom Wolf has reported that there are over 1 million mail-in ballots left to be counted, as some counties, mainly Democratic counties, will not count until tomorrow morning. Right now, Donald Trump is in the lead in Pennsylvania with 58.57% of the vote compared to Joe Biden's 40.16%. For the Attorney General race, Josh Shapiro, the incumbent Democrat, is currently losing to Heather Heidelbaugh with who is leading with 55.2% of the vote. Right now for the Auditor General race, Timothy L. DeFore, the Republican, is leading with 58% of the vote, and Stacey Garrity is leading with 57.9%, and she's the Republican there. So this kind of shows that Pennsylvania right now has been counting most of their Republican votes in some of their smaller counties, some of their more rural counties, which is not a surprise as they have smaller populations. It's going to take longer for Allegheny County, Philadelphia County, Montgomery County, all these areas to count their votes. So Pennsylvania is not over. Anyone in the Keystone State right now I recommend you stay up and you watch the election because this is going to be a tight one.
Do you think that we'll get the results for Pennsylvania anytime soon? I'm kind of concerned it'll be like a week.
In my own opinion, I guess I'll say, I think that Pennsylvania is going to be the most contested state. President Trump is not going to go down without a fight in Pennsylvania. Neither is former Vice President Joe Biden. He's from Pennsylvania. It would be awesome for him to win his home state, but you never know what can happen. Currently, right now, we are looking at, according to the Associated Press, that Joe Biden does lead with 209 electoral votes compared to Donald Trump's 118. The candidate that wins the presidency will have to achieve 270. So we're still waiting on massive electoral races in Texas and Florida, and Georgia, which will give like a lot of votes to whichever candidate wins.
All right, thank you very much for that. It has been 2 years since 11 people lost their lives in the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in the United States in Pittsburgh's Squirrel Hill neighborhood. Amanda Andrews wrote a story on the changing political climate as it shapes remembrance of the victims and joins us now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Multiple groups and organizations held events leading up to the anniversary. What did they want people to do?
Yeah, so it was really interesting this year because there was not only this emphasis on commemorating the victims, but there was also this emphasis on political activism that I noticed talking to multiple groups, whether that was one of the groups I interviewed, Squirrel Hill Stands Against Gun Violence. They are a nonprofit organization that's political in nature, and also even here at Point Park, the May Their Memory Be a Blessing event was talking specifically about how hate infects faith-based communities. And, we shouldn't forget the fact that the shooter, who was responsible for the shooting at the synagogue, was a white supremacist, and that his actions were racially motivated, and based on ethnicity, and that there was very much hate in his heart, and as we live in a political climate where the president is unwilling to condemn white supremacy, and we're seeing, rise of these sort of rallies all across the country. I think that there's not really, in my personal opinion, a way to separate politics, from remembering these victims.
Right. Understood. So, Squirrel Hill Stands Against Gun Violence. They are pro gun legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So, what exactly are they hoping to change?
So I thought I should be clear in that they are not against the Second Amendment. They're not about banning all guns, but they are for limits on high-capacity magazines. They are also say that they are for extreme risk protection orders, red flag laws, basically, that if a person were to be unstable, that their gun would be able to be taken away from them by someone, who would raise that sort of alarm with, a local official. And that doesn't mean they couldn't get their gun back. They could at a certain point where they're, deemed to be stable. But that's sort of what they're pushing for, is sort of common sense gun safety legislation is what they told me.
Okay. And so where do they stand on political candidates? Are they supporting, when it comes to the presidency or maybe local elections? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so they are doing a lot of phone banking for candidates, or at least they were, prior to the election. Most of the candidates that they're supporting are Democrats, just because the gun control, gun safety debate has become so politicized. In the year 2020, we're seeing almost entirely all gun safety candidates are Democrats, and all, Republican candidates are for, gun rights. And there's not much variance there.
Yeah. And you also spoke with Pastor Jennifer McCurry about an event held at Point Park to honor people who lost their lives in their place of worship. What did she share with you about that event?
So she talked about sort of where this event was coming from, how it all came together. There was a student on campus, Riley Crow, who came up to her and was actually asking about creating a Jewish organization for students on campus. And they came to talking about how to commemorate the victims of the synagogue shooting. And they came up with this event, May Their Memory Be a Blessing, that would talk about not only the synagogue shooting, but other shootings as well. The one that happened in New Zealand, for instance, is several years ago, and in the racially based motivated shooting. And I just want to get the location of this right. I know it's in my article. In the South, I'm trying to remember where it was, but multiple mass shootings that have taken place across the United States, because there is a commonality of, in recent years, of mass shooters coming into spaces of worship.
And you mentioned Riley Crow, who you also interviewed. So, what was that journey like for him, and what are his thoughts on politics and hatred?
Well, I think that, like many students at Point Park, he thinks that, there's no space for hatred here. There shouldn't be. And, that we deserve to be, open and talking about where hatred may exist, and that I think particularly in his trying to create an organization for Jewish students on campus, there's not really a space for them where they specifically can go to, so, I think that basically there is no room for hate, and if, we vote with a consciousness and we, commune together, that we can help stop, hate spreading in our communities.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you very much for coming. So with that is it from WPPJ Radio for our coverage of Election Night 2020. We'll be back one more time to say goodbye, back to our partners at UView Television next door.
And after the break, we'll have our final check-in with Sam Hindman at Point Park's Watch Party. We're almost done for the evening, so make sure to stay tuned.
You're watching History Happen here on Election Night 2020, but of course, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, you can ask us questions on our hashtag PointParkVotes on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we'll be answering them throughout the night.
Welcome back. Sam Hindman has been at Point Park's Election Night Watch Party all evening and has had the opportunity to speak with students. Hi, Sam. We hope you're hanging in there.
We are back here at Village Park where things are definitely wrapping up for the evening. All the festivities have unfortunately been taken down, but that's how it is whenever a fun night comes to a close. Lastly, we have Clark Atkinson here, and Clark, tell me your thoughts about the evening. How do you think the election show went, as well as the party in general?
Well, I think it went really awesome. I kept kind of cheering whenever I'd figure out what state is official and everything, and I think the hot chocolate and the food, it just kind of brought everyone together, and just like when we're all like eating together and everything, I was able to see some people from our school that I had never met before, and I was like, oh, you all care about this is cool. So it was pretty awesome, yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Clark, and thank you guys. So that's it for this evening. Everybody's headed home. Make sure you stay bundled up for the rest of the week, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Our partners at WPPJ have done a great job highlighting the reporting of our student journalists and providing context to national issues. Now it's time for them to say goodnight.
Thanks, Marley. And thank you for listening or watching our coverage of Election Night 2020. The entire team spent months planning tonight's broadcast and preparing for continued coverage throughout the next few weeks or until the results are finalized. Thank you to our general manager, Cole D'Alacandro. Sorry. And our news director and producer, Nick Tomarello, for making sure that our broadcast could be a success. Thank you to our audio engineer for the evening and assistant general manager, Zachary Whitman. Our poll checker, Alexis Bonifate, Andy Conte, and the entire Center for Media Innovation team. Thank you to our partners at The Globe for joining us throughout the evening, the editor-in-chief, Jordan Hronik, co-news editors, Nardos Haile and Jake Dabkowski, and editor-elect Amanda Andrews. Your reporting helps provide context to current issues throughout the university, city, and beyond. Make sure to pick up a copy of The Globe's special election edition this Thursday, and for other stories and continued reporting from student journalists, you can visit ppuglobe.com. And thank you to our partners at UView Television for broadcasting our coverage on your TV or online. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at WPPJ Radio and Instagram at WPPJ 670 AM. For all of us at WPPG Radio, I am Carlo Andreassi. Thank you for listening and watching. Good night.
WPPJ, thank you so much for all your efforts within making this show possible. Now, for our last poll result, nothing has changed so far. Trump sits at 110 electoral votes, and Biden sits at 167 electoral votes. Now, still a long way to go to get to that 270 electoral votes, but of course, UView will be keeping a steady update for you all within the next week.
And thank you all so much, I should say, for joining us this evening. Both UView and WPPJ will share updates throughout the election season on our social media to continue to provide you updates. You can follow WPPJ on Facebook and Twitter at WPPJ Radio. And on Instagram at WPPJ 670 AM, and on UView Television at UView Television across all social media sites.
And we want to thank everyone who has helped make this show possible. To Point Park University, the School of Communications, the Center for Media Innovation, thank you. We wouldn't have been able to put this whole production on without you.
And to our students who put this entire thing together, thank you. Everyone at UView Television, WPPJ Radio, The Globe, and the Point Park News Service. What a production.
What a production. This has been just so amazing. As you can tell, we are clearly so hungry. But still, we want to keep thanking everybody. Our executive producers, Cole D'Alessandro and Taylor Spirito, as well as our producers, Nick Tomarello and Colton DeBias. Your hard work does not go unnoticed. To the entire staff and everyone who has helped with WPPJ's side of things, your contributions to the show are so valued. And to Jordan, Hronik, and all of her other staff at The Globe, thank you for contributing to both productions tonight.
And the same goes for you as well, Marley, of course. And to all of our production crew working behind the scenes, Cam Wilson, Jess Dillon, Maddie Carden, RJ Garrison, Peyton, Communal, Alexis Shawless, Ben Tenuta, Patrick Riley Crow, Dan Compton, Michaela Weiler, EJ Dwyer, Carlo Andreassi. You all made this show run.
And we want to thank our correspondents and reporters as well for working tirelessly on this for weeks now. Nick Konopka, Sam Hindman, Zoe Angelucci, Trish Marias, and Jess Dillon. Thank you.
Our advisors in the School of Communications and club supervisors really helped guide us along the way. Thank you to Tom Baggerman, Dean Burney, Robin Shekala, Dave Fabilli, Amy Marie Dorston, Fred Angli-O'Leary, Dion Page, Dale Nodianos, and Andy Conti for helping us throughout this entire thing.
And speaking of Andy, I'll put this down. Andy, we want to thank the Center for Media Innovation for housing us during the show. To Andy Conti, Lisa Knapp, Stacy Federoff, Edward Robis, Jacob Balsterini, Olivia Valio, Christina Morton, and Lauren Doyle, thank you so much.
And to the Point Park faculty and staff for providing us with everything we needed. To Ro DiTomaso and all of Student Production Services, all their workers, for providing us with equipment. To Gina Puppo for helping spread the word. To Paul Hennigan and, of course, happy retirement. And notably to Dean Palo for all of the help and all the food.
Oh my gosh, thank you. And of course, we want to thank all of our guests who contributed to the show. To Paul Hennigan, Keith Palo, Mike Doyle, Luke Negron, Nicholas Black, Vanessa Vivas, and everyone involved with helping create content. Thank you.
And of course, what's a show without an audience? Thank you to everyone who tuned in at any point tonight, whether that's at home on the TV or on the computer, on the TVs lining the Center for Media Innovation. If you contributed to Point Park Votes, we've been working on this show for months, and just to bring it to you, we hope you enjoyed the program.
And that's all of the time we have for this evening. Be sure to tune into UView's YouTube page every day this week, starting at 6 p.m. for your continuing coverage on this historic election. For our correspondents, reporters, and production teams, I'm Marley Pinchak.
And I'm Taylor Spirito. Have a good night, everyone.